You think winter is bad? Try endless snow, wild predators, and no pants. You don't survive the ice age. You crawl through it. If you're lucky, the story explores the most brutal stretches of the last ice age, where survival meant hunting mammoths while starving, sharing a cave with 7 people and one wolf, and trying to stay warm with wet moss. Black humor comes through failed fires, glacier falls, and mammoth hunting accidents. Life expectancy? Low. Socks? Never invented. The pale spectral glow that bled across the eastern horizon offered no warmth, no soft embrace of a new day. Instead, it served as a stark, unambiguous summons. The endless cycle of survival, a relentless rhythm dictated by the gnawing cold and the primal need to endure, was about to begin anew. Within the shallow, smoke stained recess of their makeshift shelter, a collection of huddled forms began to stir, their movements stiff and punctuated by groans of aching joints. The night had been a brutal testament to the season's unforgiving grip, and every breath exhaled was a visible puff of white mist, a stark, ephemeral declaration of their precarious existence against the biting frigidity of the world outside. The landscape that lay before them, stretching out in a vast, unbroken panorama, was a study in desolation. It was a monochrome tapestry woven from the stark whites of frost covered earth and the muted grays of winter worn rock. The occasional hardy scrub, a stubborn defiance of the pervasive chill, was a mere speck against the immense canvas. In the distance, the colossal, silent majesty of a glacier loomed, an imposing monument to the sheer, indifferent power of the ice. This was their world, this unforgiving steppe, a place where the sun, when it deigned to appear, offered little in the way of comfort, and where the wind, an ever present companion, wielded its icy touch with relentless, biting intent. It was a canvas painted with the unvarnished truths of existence, a brutal masterpiece of stark realities where every moment was a negotiation with oblivion. The very air within the shelter was thick with the acrid scent of dried dung and animal fat, a familiar perfume that clung to their furs and permeated their very beings. It was the smell of survival, the unmistakable aroma of a life lived on the razor's edge. Groaning, a woman named Lyra pushed herself up from the packed earth, her limbs protesting the prolonged immobility. Her fingers, still stiff and clumsy from the cold, fumbled with the crude fastenings of her fur tunic. Beside her, her youngest, a boy named Kale, whimpered softly in his sleep, his small body burrowed deep within the warmth of her side. The fire, their meager heart in the vast, indifferent darkness, had dwindled to a few glowing embers, its heat a precious, fleeting commodity. The ever present threat of its extinction was a constant, unspoken anxiety that shadowed their every waking moment. The elders, their faces deeply lined and etched with the harsh wisdom of countless winters, were already awake, their eyes scanning the encroaching dawn with a practiced vigilance. They were the repositories of knowledge, the living libraries of a world that offered no written records, no maps, only the silent, brutal lessons of experience. Old Man Theron, his frame bent but his spirit unbroken, stirred the embers with a sharpened stick, coaxing a flicker of renewed life from the dying coals. His breath, a ragged rasp, plumed white in the frigid air. His gaze, however, remained fixed on the opening of the shelter, his keen eyes assessing the subtle shifts in the wind, the almost imperceptible changes in the light that might signal danger or opportunity. The concept of morning held a different meaning in this age. It was not a herald of ease, but a stark demarcation, a signal that the ceaseless struggle for existence must be recommenced. The night, while fraught with its own perils of predation and exposure, at least offered a brief respite from the constant exertion. Now, the demands of the day would begin anew, the gnawing hunger that would soon become a demanding beast within their bellies, the unending quest for fuel to sustain their precious fire, the ever present need to find sustenance in a land that yielded its bounty only grudgingly, and often at a terrible cost. Lyra reached for a shard of flint, her calloused fingers tracing its rough edges. Her task for the day, like most days, would be to tend to the fire, to ensure its survival, for it was the fragile anchor that held the encroaching darkness at bay. But before that, the children needed to be fed, and the meager stores of dried meat and roots were perilously low. She glanced at the sleeping Kyle, his face impossibly young, blissfully unaware of the precariousness of their situation. Her heart ached with a fierce, protective love, a fierce determination to shield him from the relentless cruelty of their world. The wind, a persistent, insidious enemy, whispered through the entrance of their shelter, carrying with it the sharp bite of ice and the scent of distant snow. It found its way through the crude weave of their furs, seeping into their bones and stealing the warmth that their bodies so desperately fought to retain. Each gust was a reminder of the sheer, overwhelming power of the elements, a force that dwarfed their own frail existence. They were but specks of warmth and life in a world dominated by ice and wind, a constant battle waged against an opponent that seemed to possess an inexhaustible supply of fury. The vastness of the plains was a terrifying beauty. It stretched to horizons that seemed to blur into the sky, an endless expanse of white and gray, broken only by the skeletal forms of ancient trees stripped bare by the wind and the occasional hardy scrub that clung tenaciously to the frozen earth. In the distance, the glacial formations, like slumbering giants, cast long blue shadows, their frozen surfaces reflecting the pale light of the nascent day. This was a land that demanded a primal respect, a landscape that could offer sustenance, but also harbored countless dangers, a place where the unwary or the unprepared could be swiftly and brutally consumed. The very stillness of the plains, when the wind momentarily abated, was unnerving. It was a pregnant silence, a held breath before the next onslaught. In these lulls, the distant guttural cry of some unseen predator might carry on the air, or the almost imperceptible rumble of shifting ice from a distant glacier could be heard. These were the sounds that kept them vigilant, that sharpened their senses and reminded them of the constant, lurking threat that surrounded their fragile existence. Lyra finally managed to coax Kale awake, his eyes blinking sleepily against the dim light. "Come, little one," she murmured, her voice raspy. "The sun is rising. We must find wood." The boy, still groggy, burrowed his face into her furs, reluctant to face the biting chill. But the instinct for survival, ingrained from birth, was strong. He knew, as she did, that the fire was their lifeline. Without it, The cold would claim them, slowly and inexorably, freezing their limbs, stealing their breath, and extinguishing the vital spark of life. The women of the clan and the elder children capable of bearing the burden would soon venture out, their eyes sharp, their movements cautious. Their mission was a desperate one, the ceaseless, arduous search for fuel. Every twig, every dried clump of grass, every discarded bone fragment, these were the precious treasures that would keep the fire alive. The dampness of the air, the pervasive frost that coated every surface, made the task a Sisyphean labor. To find dry tinder was a rare stroke of luck, and the hours spent meticulously preparing it, drying it further near the precious embers, and then patiently coaxing a flame from its reluctant fibers was a ritual as vital as any hunt. It was a testament to their resilience, their unwavering commitment to the flicker of warmth and light that represented their continued existence. The success of this endeavor was not merely about comfort, it was about life itself, a battle waged with patience and perseverance against the encroaching, all consuming cold. The very act of finding and tending to fuel was a profound demonstration of their will to survive, a daily reaffirmation of their defiance against the overwhelming power of their environment. Each successful spark, each sustained flame, was a small victory in the grand, ceaseless war against the Ice Age. The dawn, a sickly gray smear across the eastern horizon, brought with it not the promise of warmth, but the sharp, immediate sting of renewed cold. Within the cramped confines of the shelter, the low, dying pulse of the fire was a stark, tangible measure of their precarious state. It was a fragile beacon, a mere handful of glowing embers that whispered of the vital heat they desperately needed. The wind, an insatiable entity, clawed at the entrance, its icy breath a constant reminder of the unforgiving world outside. Every gust seemed to carry with it the chilling truth. The fire was their lifeline, and its continued existence was a battle waged every waking moment. Lyra, her movements stiff with the lingering chill of the night, reached for the flint and steel. Her fingers, raw and cracked from the biting air, fumbled with the precious tools. The task of rekindling the fire, even from mere embers, was a delicate art. It required patience, precision, and an unwavering focus. She carefully selected the driest, most powdery fragments of dried dung, arranging them meticulously over the faint glow. A spark, a tiny ephemeral miracle, was needed to breathe life back into their dying hearth. Kale, now fully awake and shivering despite the furs, watched her with wide, expectant eyes. He understood, with an instinct born of this harsh existence, that the fire was more than just heat. It was a shield against the darkness, a bulwark against the encroaching cold that sought to claim them all. The hunters, the stalwarts of their small clan, had returned sometime during the deep of the night. Their silent, grim presence in the pre-dawn gloom was a heavy indicator of their success, or rather their lack thereof. The scent of success, the rich aroma of fresh meat, was conspicuously absent. Instead, the air was heavy with the damp smell of wet furs and the faint metallic tang of sweat and exertion. They had ventured out into the teeth of the gale, their senses honed to the faintest trace of animal scent, their bodies pushed to the very brink of endurance. The plains, A vast, indifferent expanse of ice and snow offered its bounty sparingly, and often only at a terrible cost. Their return, empty handed, meant not only the gnawing pangs of hunger would intensify, but also that the pressure to find fuel would become even more acute. The meat, if they were fortunate enough to procure it, would require cooking, and the fire, already teetering on the edge of extinction, would demand even more sustenance. The responsibility for the fire's survival rested heavily on the shoulders of the women and the elder children. While the hunters faced the ferocity of the wind and the potential danger of predators in their pursuit of sustenance, the women were tasked with the equally vital, though perhaps less immediately perilous, mission of securing fuel. It was a task that demanded a different kind of vigilance, a keen eye for the smallest potential source of combustion in a landscape that seemed designed to smother any spark. They were the keepers of the flame, the tireless foragers who scoured the frozen earth for anything that would burn. Lyra, having managed to coax a hesitant flame back to life, now meticulously fed it with the most precious of materials, dried grass roots scraped from beneath the frozen surface, and small, brittle twigs that had miraculously survived the constant onslaught of the wind. Each addition was a calculated risk, a weighing of immediate need against the long term scarcity of resources. She could not afford to be profligate, not with the dwindling daylight and the vast, unyielding emptiness that surrounded them. The process was a constant balancing act, a relentless pursuit of enough. The gathering of fuel was not a single, decisive event, but a continuous, interwoven aspect of their daily existence. Even as Lyra nurtured the fire, other members of the clan were already preparing to venture out. Mara, a woman whose strength belied her slender frame, began to organize the younger children. Her voice, though soft, carried an authority born of experience and necessity. "We go towards the dried marshlands," she announced, her gaze sweeping over the small gathering of women and older children. "The wind may have blown some of the dead reeds into drifts. We will need to dig. The journey to the marshlands was not a long one, perhaps only a half day's walk, but in this climate, any excursion was fraught with peril. The ground was a treacherous tapestry of hidden ice and frozen earth, and the wind, even here, retained its brutal, cutting edge. Each step was a conscious effort, a planting of feet with careful deliberation to avoid a fall that could result in injury, or worse, an inability to return. The children, bundled in layers of rough spun hides and layered furs, moved with a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. They had learned, from their earliest years, the paramount importance of fuel. The memory of a night when the fire had dwindled to nothing, and the suffocating terror of the absolute cold that followed, was seared into their collective consciousness. Their destination was a low-lying area, once a vibrant wetland, now a frozen testament to the season's dominance. The wind had indeed sculpted the landscape, piling snow and ice into undulating drifts. It was here, buried beneath the frozen detritus, that they hoped to find the dried stalks of marsh grasses, their hollow interiors a precious source of tinder and kindling. The work was backbreaking. They used sharpened sticks and their bare, numb fingers to scrape away at the icy crust, digging into the frozen mud beneath. The dampness of the air seemed to seep into everything, clinging to their clothes and chilling them to the bone, even through the layers of fur. Here, A young boy named Tor, no older than 10, but already bearing the gaunt look of scarcity, called out, his voice cracking with effort. He held aloft a bundle of brittle, brown stalks, their dryness a palpable relief. Lyra, who had joined the foraging party, hurried over. She examined the bundle carefully, her calloused fingers testing the dryness. Good, Tor, she said, her voice a low murmur of approval. Very good. Bring them to the shelter, carefully. We will need to dry them further near the fire. The gathering was a testament to their resourcefulness. They unearthed clumps of dried moss, clinging stubbornly to the lee side of ancient, gnarled roots that emerged from the frozen earth like skeletal fingers. They found small, desiccated berries still clinging to their branches, which, while offering little in the way of immediate fuel, could be crushed and mixed with more flammable material to help sustain a flame. Every find, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was treated with reverence. These were not mere scraps, they were the building blocks of their continued existence, the tangible proof that they could, with effort and ingenuity, defy the encroaching oblivion. The women worked with a quiet, focused intensity, their faces etched with the strain of their labor. The cold seemed to penetrate their very bones, making each movement an effort. Their hands, even when gloved, grew numb, their fingers stiffening, making the delicate task of gathering and sorting increasingly difficult. Yet they persevered. They knew that for every dry stalk, every clump of moss they found, they were adding precious minutes, perhaps even hours, to the lifespan of their fire. The thought of returning to the shelter with empty hands, to face the gnawing emptiness of a dying hearth, was a prospect too dreadful to contemplate. As the day wore on, and the pale, weak sunlight began its slow descent, they began to gather their meager haul. Bundles of dried reeds, clumps of moss, and a scattering of brittle twigs were carefully tied together, forming awkward, bulky loads. The return journey was slower, the added weight of their findings a further testament to their labor. Each traveler carefully navigated the frozen terrain, their movements deliberate and cautious, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, ever vigilant for any sign of danger. Back at the shelter, the precious fuel was immediately brought close to the fire. The process of drying was as crucial as the gathering itself. The dampness of the air, the very breath of winter, was their enemy. Lyra and Mara set about carefully arranging the reeds and moss around the hearth, ensuring that each piece was exposed to the heat without directly touching the embers, which could cause it to ignite prematurely or be reduced to ash before its potential could be realized. This meticulous preparation was an art form, honed through countless seasons of struggle. The hunters, meanwhile, had been busy with their own tasks. Though they had returned without game, they had not been idle. They sharpened their tools, meticulously cleaned their spears and knives, and prepared their hunting garb for the next foray. Even in their failure, there was a rhythm to their actions, a practiced efficiency born of generations of survival. They spoke little, their exhaustion a palpable presence, but their actions spoke volumes about their resilience and their unwavering commitment to the clan's survival. As the light faded completely, casting long, distorted shadows across the frozen landscape, the shelter began to hum with a renewed sense of purpose. The fire, fed with the day's hard-won fuel, now burned with a steadier, more robust flame, its warmth a tangible shield against the deepening chill of the night, spread through the cramped space, chasing away the oppressive cold that had threatened to engulf them. The air, once thick with the scent of damp furs and exhaustion, now carried the comforting aroma of wood smoke and the faint, tantalizing hint of roasting roots. Kyle, his small face illuminated by the flickering light, huddled closer to the fire, his earlier apprehension replaced by a quiet contentment. He watched Lyra as she carefully added another dried reed to the flames, her movements economical and precise. He understood, with a clarity that transcended his young age, the immense effort that had gone into keeping this fragile flame alive. The gnawing cold was a constant threat, an ever present adversary. But for now, within the flickering circle of the fire's embrace, they had found a temporary sanctuary. The search for fuel, an endless, grueling endeavor, was the silent, unseen foundation upon which their continued existence was built, a testament to their unwavering will to endure against that overwhelming power of the frozen world. Each flicker of the flame was a victory, a small, hard won triumph in the relentless war against the Ice Age. The cyclical nature of their survival was starkly defined by the availability of fuel. Without it, their world would simply cease to be. The very act of gathering, of preparing, and of nurturing the fire was a ritual of defiance, a constant affirmation of life in a land that seemed designed for death. This tireless pursuit of combustible material was not merely about comfort or sustenance. It was the very essence of their struggle, the tangible manifestation of their refusal to surrender to the unyielding grip of the glacial epoch. The women, in their tireless foraging, were as vital to their survival as the hunters were, their efforts often unseen, but no less critical in maintaining the fragile pulse of their community. The success of one endeavor directly impacted the success of the other. A failed hunt meant a greater reliance on the stores of fuel, a greater burden on the women and children to find more. This interconnectedness was the bedrock of their social structure, a recognition that every member had a crucial role to play in the overarching quest for survival. The careful conservation of fuel was an ingrained habit, a deeply rooted instinct. No piece of dry material was ever wasted. Even the ash from the fire was collected and used as a potent fertilizer for the sparse crops they managed to cultivate in the warmer, albeit still frigid months, and as a component in their primitive building materials. It was a holistic approach to survival where nothing was considered expendable. The relentless pursuit of fuel was a physical and mental exertion, a constant drain on their already limited energy reserves. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. The memory of past failures, of fires that had died, and the subsequent swiftness with which the cold had claimed the unprepared served as a potent motivator. Each dawn brought the same stark reality. The fire must live, and to ensure that, the endless search for fuel would continue. The children, trained from a tender age in the importance of this task, understood that their contribution, however small, was vital. They learned to identify the driest grasses, to recognize the hollow reeds that would ignite most readily, and to carefully carry their findings back to the shelter without wasting precious energy. Their small hands, though often numb, were instrumental in sifting through debris and uncovering hidden caches of potential fuel. The elder women, their bodies stooped with age and hardship, still participated in the gathering, their experienced eyes spotting opportunities that younger foragers might miss. They moved slower, their steps more measured, but their knowledge of the terrain and their understanding of what constituted valuable fuel were unparalleled. The cycle was an unbroken chain, linking the past to the present and ensuring the possibility of a future. The wind, a constant, unwelcome companion, paradoxically aided their efforts at times. It scoured away the fresh snowfall, exposing dried vegetation and the brittle remnants of ancient grasses. It also helped to dry out materials that had been exposed to the dampness, albeit slowly and imperfectly. Yet, the wind's primary role in their lives was that of an antagonist, a force that relentlessly sought to extinguish the very life they fought so hard to preserve. The fuel gathered was not simply burned indiscriminately, it was managed with a profound understanding of its properties. The most easily ignitable materials, like the finely powdered dung and dried moss, were reserved for starting the fire and for rekindling it when it threatened to die. The tougher, more substantial reeds and twigs were used to build up the heat and sustain the flame for longer periods. This careful rationing ensured that their precious reserves lasted as long as possible, stretching their survival through the unforgiving days and nights. The narrative of their lives was intrinsically linked to the flame. When the fire burned brightly, so did their hopes. When it flickered low, so did their spirits. The constant quest for fuel was the engine that drove their existence, a perpetual motion machine powered by the unyielding will to survive. The children's laughter, when it echoed within the shelter, was often a direct consequence of the fire's warmth, a testament to the comfort and security it provided. Without it, the darkness would have been absolute, and the silence would have been broken only by the mournful howl of the wind and the gnawing emptiness within their bellies. The cycle of foraging for fuel was as fundamental to their existence as the cycle of the sun and moon, a perpetual, essential rhythm that dictated their every action. The great beasts moved like living glaciers across the stark, white expanse. Their passage stirred the frozen dust of ages, each colossal footfall a seismic event in the otherwise hushed world. For the small band of humans, huddled behind a ridge of wind-scoured ice, the sight was a potent cocktail of awe and gnawing dread. A mammoth, the very word, conjured images of immense power, of a life-sustaining bounty that could see them through the deepest freeze, and of a danger so profound it could shatter their fragile existence in an instant. Their woolly coats, a deep russet brown, were matted with snow and ice, giving them the appearance of ambulatory mounds of earth, dusted with winter's shroud. The tusks, curved like the horns of some forgotten demon, gleamed dully in the weak sunlight, testaments to their strength and their ability to defend themselves against any threat, natural or otherwise. The elders of the clan, their faces like maps etched by 1,000 harsh seasons, studied the herd with the intense focus of predators. They did not see a single animal, but a complex ecosystem of potential and peril. Old Gorok, his back permanently bowed from decades of toil, pointed a gnarled finger towards a solitary female, slightly separated from the main group, her gait a fraction slower than the others. Her, he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. She carries the weight of a season, Perhaps a calf soon. She will be slower to react. His words, though quiet, carried the weight of immense experience. He had seen mammoths felled and seen hunters consumed by them. He knew the subtle signs, the minute deviations from the norm that spoke of vulnerability. Lyra, though her role was not directly on the hunt, felt the collective tension ripple through the small group. Her own stomach, already tight with the persistent ache of hunger, gave a lurch. The success of this endeavor meant more than just a full belly for a few days. It meant preserved hides for warmer clothing, bone for tools and ornamentation, and enough meat to perhaps even store for leaner times. But the cost was etched into the memory of every surviving member of the clan. The gaping wounds, the broken limbs, the chilling silence of those who did not return. These were the other facets of the mammoth's shadow. The hunters, their faces grim and determined, began their preparations. There was no shouting, no bravado, just a quiet, intense communion of purpose. Their spears, fashioned from sturdy ash saplings, were tipped with expertly knapped flint, their edges honed to a fearsome sharpness. Knives, also of flint, were lashed to stout wooden handles, ready for the brutal work of butchery. The hides they wore were thick and meticulously prepared, offering a degree of protection against the elements and hopefully against the desperate, bone shattering blows of a wounded beast. Kael, the youngest of the hunters, his body still lean and untested, felt a tremor run through him, a mixture of exhilaration and raw fear. He gripped his spear, its weight familiar, but its purpose today terrifyingly amplified. He looked to Kalen, the leader of the hunting party, a man whose stoic demeanor hid a fierce, unyielding resolve. Kalen met his gaze, offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of the danger and a subtle boost of encouragement. The strategy was as old as their people. They could not hope to bring down a healthy adult mammoth through brute force alone. Their strength lay in their agility, their cunning, and their ability to exploit the environment. The plan was to herd the chosen female towards a section of terrain where the frozen earth might be less stable, perhaps near a concealed crevice or a steep, icy embankment. Their movements had to be precise, coordinated, a deadly dance of deception and calculated aggression. As the hunters began their slow, deliberate approach, weaving through the sparse cover of snow-laden scrub and glacial debris, Lyra felt a pang of anxiety. She watched their figures, small and vulnerable, against the vast, indifferent landscape, shrink with each passing moment. The wind, a constant companion, whipped around them, carrying their scent, a scent that could be both their undoing and their guide. The mammoths, vast and powerful, were also creatures of habit and instinct, their senses dulled by the sheer immensity of their own presence. But an enraged mammoth, its tusks capable of ripping through flesh and bone with terrifying ease, was a force of nature that even the most experienced hunter approached with profound respect. The wind carried the low, resonant trumpeting of a mammoth, a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but deep within the chest cavity. It was a sound that spoke of immense power, of territorial assertion, and of a primal awareness of their surroundings. This particular herd was a significant prize. The sheer volume of meat represented, the thickness of their hides, which would offer unparalleled warmth and durability, and the potential for marrow rich bones that could sustain them for days. But the risks were commensurate with the rewards. A single misstep, a moment of hesitation, and the hunters could find themselves on the wrong end of a charge that would leave nothing but shattered remnants. The selected female, a magnificent specimen even in her supposed vulnerability, moved with an inherent grace that belied her immense size. Her shaggy, matted fur was a testament to the harshness of the environment, a natural armor against the biting winds and freezing temperatures. The sheer scale of her was humbling. Her legs were like tree trunks, her head a massive, powerful engine of destruction, crowned with those iconic, curving tusks. These were not mere ornaments, they were tools of survival, capable of digging through snow for buried vegetation, of clearing paths through drifts, and most crucially, of defending against any threat. The hunters understood that to engage with such a creature was to dance with death itself, a stark reality that underscored the courage and desperation that fueled their actions. Gorok, his eyes narrowed in concentration, gestured subtly, indicating the direction of the wind and the potential for the herd to veer off course. Even a slight change in trajectory could render their carefully laid plans obsolete. The hunters were not simply relying on their weapons. They were relying on their knowledge of the land, their understanding of animal behavior, and their ability to predict the unpredictable. The frozen plains offered little in the way of cover, and their movements had to be as fluid and efficient as possible, minimizing any unnecessary exposure. Kalen, his movements economical and precise, signaled to his companions. They were fanning out, their formations designed to subtly influence the herd's direction without triggering a panicked stampede. The objective was not to provoke a full-blown charge at this stage, but to gently guide their chosen prey towards the predetermined zone of engagement. This required an immense amount of patience and a deep understanding of the animal's senses. The mammoths, despite their size, were not inherently aggressive unless threatened. Their primary concerns were foraging and maintaining the cohesion of the herd. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Every breath seemed amplified, every rustle of frozen grass a potential alarm. The hunters were acutely aware that they were the intruders, the foreign element in this frozen dominion. Their very presence was an act of defiance against the overwhelming power of the natural world. The thought of the sheer density of muscle and bone beneath that shaggy hide sent a shiver down Kyle's spine, a primal acknowledgement of the physical gulf between man and mammoth. The hunters knew that once they committed to the attack, there would be no turning back. The initial engagement would be the most dangerous phase. It would involve throwing spears, aiming for the most vulnerable areas, the flanks, the underside, anywhere that could inflict a debilitating wound. The mammoth's thick hide and dense musculature were formidable defenses, often deflecting or absorbing blows that would fell lesser creatures. But the hunters had learned to exploit the slightest opening, the briefest moment of vulnerability. The elders had identified a treacherous stretch of frozen riverbed, partially obscured by snowdrifts, where the ice could potentially be weaker. The plan was to drive the chosen female towards this area, hoping that the added weight and the potential for the ice to give way would create a critical advantage. It was a high-risk strategy, one that could easily backfire, but the potential reward was too great to ignore. The sheer mass of a mammoth meant that any injury, however minor, could quickly escalate into a life threatening situation for the animal and a golden opportunity for the hunters. The hunters advanced with a synchronized grace, their movements almost silent against the frozen landscape. They were shadows, purposeful and intent, their focus narrowed to the task at hand. The herd, a majestic, imposing presence, continued its slow, inexorable progress across the plains. The chosen female, her head lowered slightly as she grazed, seemed oblivious to the imminent danger. This was the moment of truth, the delicate balance between stealth and aggression that would determine their survival. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to witness the outcome of this ancient, primal contest. The sheer scale of the endeavor was breathtaking. The hunters, like ants, preparing to challenge a mountain, their courage born not of ignorance, but of absolute necessity. Each hunter understood their role, their specific task in the intricate choreography of the hunt. There were those who would distract, those who would spear, and those who would be ready to press the advantage once a wound had been inflicted. The success of the entire operation hinged on their collective discipline and their unwavering adherence to the plan. The thought of failure was a cold weight in their stomachs, a constant reminder of the unforgiving nature of their world, where survival was a daily, hard-won battle. Even the slightest miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences, not just for the individuals involved, but for the entire clan. The shadow of the mammoth was not just a physical presence, it was a psychological weight, a constant reminder of the fine line they walked between life and oblivion. The elders had drilled into them the importance of respecting the animal, of understanding its power, and of never underestimating its capacity for destruction. This was not a sport. It was a desperate fight for survival, where every decision carried life or death implications. The ancient instincts of the clan, honed over countless generations, were now being put to the ultimate test. The raw materials of their existence, meat, hides, bone, were embodied in these colossal creatures. But to claim them, they had to confront a force that dwarfed their own in every conceivable way. The stark beauty of the frozen landscape provided a dramatic backdrop to this unfolding drama, a silent witness to the eternal struggle between predator and prey. The wind, a constant chilling presence, whispered the tales of past hunts, of both triumphs and tragedies, adding another layer of solemnity to the proceedings. The very air seemed charged with anticipation, a palpable energy that resonated with the primal instincts of both the hunters and the hunted. The mammoths, magnificent in their power, were also creatures of the earth, their lives dictated by the rhythms of the seasons and the availability of food. The hunters, in their own way, were also attuned to these rhythms, their movements and strategies dictated by the same elemental forces that governed the lives of the beasts they pursued. The success of the hunt was not merely a matter of brute force. It was a complex interplay of observation, strategy, and an intimate understanding of the natural world. The deep respect that the hunters held for the mammoth, despite their intent to kill it, was a testament to their connection to the earth and its creatures. They understood that they were part of a larger, intricate web of life, and that even in their pursuit of sustenance, they had to acknowledge the power and majesty of the creatures they hunted. This respect was not born of sentimentality, but of a deep, ingrained knowledge that their own survival was inextricably linked to the health and balance of the ecosystem around them. The failure of the mammoths to thrive would in turn have dire consequences for the human clan. Therefore, while the hunt was a matter of life and death, it was also conducted with a sense of profound responsibility, a recognition of the sacredness of the life they were about to take. The preparation of weapons was not just a practical necessity, it was a ritual, a way of imbuing their tools with intent and purpose. Each stone was carefully selected, each point meticulously sharpened, each spear lashed with practiced hands. This was more than just craftsmanship. It was a manifestation of their collective will to survive, a tangible expression of their defiance against the overwhelming forces of nature. The hunters, their bodies lean and hardened by the relentless demands of their environment, moved with an efficient grace that spoke of countless hours of training and experience. They were the embodiment of their clan's resilience, their determination, and their unwavering commitment to ensuring the survival of their people. The shadow of the mammoth loomed large, a symbol of both immense power and the potential for sustenance, and the hunters, stepping from the relative safety of the clan's shelter, were about to step directly into that shadow, armed with nothing but their courage, their skill, and their unyielding will to live. The cave, more than just a mere overhang of rock, was their universe. It was a fragile haven, a scooped out defiance against the vast, indifferent maw of the frozen world. Within its rough hewn embrace, the flickering heart of their existence, the fire pulsed with a life of its own. Its tendrils of light, a smoky, amber caress, fought a constant, valiant battle against the encroaching darkness that pressed in from the cave's deeper recesses. These dancing shadows, cast by the hungry flames, were not merely visual phenomena. They were living entities that played across the rough-hewn walls, imbuing the solid rock with a spectral, ephemeral quality. The air within this sanctuary was a potent, olfactory tapestry, the pervasive scent of damp earth clinging stubbornly to the very stone that sheltered them, mingled with the musky, leathery aroma of animal hides, meticulously cured and repurposed. Overriding all, however, was the rich, savory perfume of roasted meat, a testament to their recent, hard-won success, the mammoth hunt. It was a smell that spoke of survival, of sustenance, of the precious bounty that had been wrested from the jaws of winter. Bodies, a constellations of shared warmth, were a testament to their communal existence. They huddled together, a jumble of limbs and forms, seeking solace and strength in proximity. The young, their faces still soft and unlined, nestled close to their mothers, their small breaths puffing out in contented clouds of condensation. They were the future, a fragile spark of continuity in a world that constantly threatened to extinguish them. The elders, their faces etched with the deep, intricate cartography of countless harsh seasons, occupied a different space within this huddle. Their hushed tones, their shared memories, their quiet impartation of wisdom, these were threads woven into the very fabric of their survival. Stories, passed down through generations, were not mere entertainment. They were lessons, guides, a living repository of knowledge that ensured their continued existence. The cave, though undeniably cramped, and a place where the occasional scurrying rodent or the silent, leathery flutter of a bat were unwelcome but accepted companions, represented an unparalleled security. It was a space where the relentless biting winds could be momentarily held at bay, where the stinging ice crystals could not find purchase, and where the gnawing cold, the ever present antagonist, lost some of its ferocious grip. This shared space, this intimate, if smoky world, was the anchor that held them against the tempest of their existence. The very texture of the cave was a constant reminder of their precarious place in the world. The floor was a packed earth, uneven and strewn with remnants of past meals, discarded bone fragments, and the occasional smooth, water-worn stone that had been brought in for some forgotten purpose. Layers of dried leaves and grasses, gathered from the brief, fleeting warmth of the warmer months, provided a thin, insulative barrier against the cold seeping from the ground, though its efficacy was questionable against the deep, pervasive chill of the winter. The walls, though offering a measure of shelter, were themselves a canvas of geological time. Streaks of mineral deposits, ancient water stains, and the rough, unforgiving texture of the natural rock created a mosaic that was both beautiful and intimidating. Every crevice, every indentation held the potential for a hidden danger, a nesting creature, or simply a draft that could chill them to the bone. Lyra, her own small form tucked close to her mother's side, ran a finger along the rough surface of the cave wall. The stone was cold, unyielding, yet it was the only protection they had. She could feel the subtle vibrations from the movements of the clan outside, the muffled thuds of preparation, the low murmur of voices carrying on the wind. Even within this sanctuary, the outside world intruded, a constant, unsettling presence. The fire, though comforting, was also a beacon, a tempting invitation to whatever might lurk in the darkness beyond their limited illumination. Its smoke, while a familiar scent, also had a way of stinging the eyes and coating the throat, a constant reminder of its primal, untamed nature. The elders, their voices low and resonant, spoke of past winters, of times when the cold had been even more relentless, when the herds had been scarcer, and when the cave had offered little more than a shallow respite. They spoke of resilience, of adaptability, of the deep, ingrained knowledge that had allowed their people to endure. Old Gorok, his voice like the grinding of stones, recounted a tale of a winter so severe that the very air had seemed to freeze solid, of a time when the snow had buried even the highest ridges, and when survival had depended on the most desperate measures. He spoke of the primal fear that had gripped the clan, but also of the unwavering determination that had seen them through. These stories were not meant to instill fear, but to remind them of the strength that lay within their lineage, the inherited resilience that was as much a part of them as their own flesh and blood. Kalen, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames, was also listening, though his attention was perhaps more focused on the practicalities of survival. He understood the lessons of the elders, but he also understood the immediate needs of the clan. The mammoth meat would provide sustenance, but it was the processing of the hides, the meticulous scraping and curing, that would truly see them through the harshness of the coming months. The bones, too, were a precious resource, to be fashioned into tools, into needles for sewing, into awls for working the tough hides, and perhaps even into decorative elements that spoke of their humanity, their need for beauty even in the bleakest of circumstances. The children, oblivious to the deeper anxieties of the adults, were engaged in their own world within the cave. They played with small carved wooden figures, their own rudimentary tools, their own nascent attempts at replicating the world around them. Their laughter, though soft, was a precious sound, a fragile counterpoint to the somber discussions of the elders. They chased each other through the smoky haze, their small bodies agile and quick, a living embodiment of the hope that fueled the clan. Lyra watched them, a quiet ache in her chest. She understood their innocence, their unburdened existence, and she hoped, with a fierce intensity, that their lives would be spared the full weight of the trials she knew were inevitable. The very layout of the cave, though seemingly haphazard, was a testament to a deep, unspoken understanding of communal living. The fire was positioned in the central, most open area, providing warmth and light to the greatest number of individuals. Sleeping areas were delineated by subtle shifts in the arrangement of furs and sleeping mats, creating small, semi private enclaves within the larger communal space. The entrance, while offering a view of the outside world, was also strategically placed to minimize the ingress of wind and snow. A makeshift windbreak, fashioned from large animal hides and stout branches, further buffered the entrance, creating a small, transitional zone between the harsh exterior and the relative warmth of the interior. Even the sounds of the cave were a symphony of survival. The crackling and popping of the fire was a constant bass note, punctuated by the soft rustling of movement, the occasional sigh, the hushed murmur of conversation, and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping bodies. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful lament that seemed to seep into the very bones of the earth. But within the cave, these sounds were muted, softened by the thickness of the rock. Yet, the knowledge of that external cacophony was ever present, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of their sanctuary. The importance of the cave extended beyond its physical attributes. It was a repository of their collective memory, a place where the rituals of their lives were enacted. The preparation of food, the mending of clothing, the shaping of tools, all these essential activities took place within its confines. It was here that the young learned from the old, where skills were passed down, where the traditions of their people were kept alive. The walls, though unadorned by deliberate art, bore the marks of their passage, smooth patches where hands had rested for generations, blackened areas near the fire, the occasional accidental scratch from a tool or a weapon. These were not blemishes, they were inscriptions, a silent testament to the lives lived within these walls. The responsibility of maintaining the cave was shared, though not explicitly assigned. Someone would always be tending the fire, ensuring that the embers never truly died. Someone would ensure that the windbreak was secure, that any drafts were addressed. Someone would clear away the accumulated debris, keeping the living space as functional as possible. This unspoken division of labor, this innate sense of communal responsibility, was as vital to their survival as the flint-tipped spears or the carefully tanned hides. It was the social glue that held them together, the silent understanding that their individual survival was inextricably linked to the well-being of the group. Lyra, as she watched her mother carefully scrape a piece of hide, felt a surge of something akin to pride. Her mother's movements were efficient, practiced. Her hands, though roughened by labor, possessed a delicate precision. She was contributing to their survival, playing her part in the intricate dance of life. The cave was not just a shelter, it was a crucible where their existence was forged, day by day, season by season. The gnawing cold, the relentless wind, the ever present threat of starvation. These were the challenges that defined their lives, and the cave, this fragile haven, was the heart of their resistance against them. It was within these walls that the embers of hope, though often flickering low, were kept alive, warmed by the shared breath and the unyielding spirit of a people determined to endure. The very air, thick with the sense of life and survival, seemed to hum with their collective will, a silent testament to their enduring presence in this unforgiving landscape. The sounds of the cave, from the crackling fire to the soft snores of the sleeping, were a lullaby of resilience, a promise of continuity whispered in the heart of the winter's deepest chill. Even the occasional unwelcome visitor, the rustle of tiny claws or the silent beat of leathery wings, served as a reminder of the wildness that pressed in on all sides and the preciousness of the small, warm pocket of life they had carved out for themselves. This fragile haven, though simple, was the sum of their efforts, the embodiment of their ingenuity, and the silent witness to their enduring struggle against the gnawing cold. The colossal mammoth, a mountain of flesh and bone, now lay butchered within the cave's more spacious anterooms. Its presence was a palpable victory, a testament to the raw courage and honed skill of the hunters who had braved the blizzard's fury. Yet, even amidst the intoxicating aroma of roasting meat, a more primal sensation persisted, a deep, insistent ache that resonated in the gut. Hunger, that ever present specter, had not been banished by the successful hunt, but merely held at bay, a beast temporarily caged. The last of the dried meat, painstakingly preserved from an earlier, less abundant season, was a rapidly diminishing pile, each shriveled strip a precious whisper of sustenance. The roots, unearthed from the frozen earth with painstaking effort, offered a gritty, earthy flavor that did little to truly sate the gnawing emptiness. The berries, gathered during the fleeting, fragile warmth of the preceding months, were long gone, their sweetness a distant memory. Every meal, even now with the promise of abundant flesh, was an exercise in deliberate consumption. The act of eating was slow, meditative, each bite savored with an intensity that bordered on reverence. No morsel was wasted. Fingers, calloused and stained, meticulously picked away any lingering shreds of meat from the bones, gnawing with a primal urgency that stripped them clean. The marrow, rich and viscous, was a delicacy prized above all else, a concentrated source of energy that was coaxed out with the careful application of stone tools. The fatty tissues, rendered down over the fire, provided a vital source of calories, their oily richness coating the tongue and coating the interior of the mouth with a satisfying, if simple, richness. The hunters, their bodies still humming with the residual adrenaline of the chase, would often recount the ordeal with a hushed intensity. Their voices, hoarse from the cold and exertion, would paint vivid pictures of the mammoth's sheer power. They spoke of the ground trembling beneath its colossal weight, of the thunderous roar that had ripped through the wind-whipped snow, of the desperate, synchronized efforts to bring the beast down. Kalen, His face, still bearing the faint traces of frostbite on his cheeks, described the beast's tusks, thick as a man's thigh, capable of impaling a hunter with a single brutal sweep. He spoke of the immense strength required to drive their spears into its thick hide, of the chilling moment when the beast, mortally wounded, had turned its blind, enraged eye upon them. Each of these near death encounters, these brushes with oblivion, had been undertaken for the meager reward of a few days' sustenance. This constant confrontation with scarcity had forged a deep, almost spiritual appreciation for every calorie consumed. The taste of fat, the subtle sweetness of cooked meat, the very texture of the food, each was a testament to the immense effort and inherent danger involved in their procurement. It was a life lived on a knife's edge, a delicate, precarious balance between existence and oblivion. The gnawing emptiness in their bellies was a constant reminder of this reality, a persistent instructor in the brutal calculus of survival. Even the children, their small faces smudged with soot and anticipation, understood the gravity of each meal. Their earlier boisterous play would often subside as the meat was brought closer, their eyes wide with a mixture of hunger and nascent understanding. They learned, through observation and by example, the importance of not wasting, of appreciating the bounty that had been so hard won. The very act of chewing, of breaking down the tough fibers of the meat, became a ritual. It was a conscious engagement with their survival, a physical manifestation of their will to continue. The sounds of chewing, a symphony of grunts and mastication, filled the cave, a comforting counterpoint to the relentless howl of the wind outside. This was not the careless gorging of a populace at ease, but the deliberate fueling of bodies that were constantly taxed by the demands of their environment. Each mouthful was a small victory against the encroaching cold, a tangible bulwark against that ever-present threat of starvation. Lyra watched her mother meticulously separate the sinew from a piece of meat, her movements economical and precise. The sinew, tough and fibrous, would be carefully dried and later used for sewing, for binding tools, for 100 different purposes where strength and resilience were paramount. Nothing was truly discarded. The hide, once the flesh was removed, would be painstakingly scraped and cured, transforming from a slippery, raw covering into durable material for clothing, for shelters, for the very means of their continued existence. The bones, too, were a treasure trove. Cracked open with stones, they yielded their precious marrow. Larger bones could be fashioned into tools, scrapers, awls, even simple digging implements. Smaller bones, more delicate, could be carved and smoothed into needles, the essential tools for mending hides and stitching together their protective garments. Even the offal, the organs and entrails were consumed, their varied textures and flavors offering different nutritional profiles, each contributing to the overall sustenance of the clan. The elders, their ancient eyes reflecting the firelight, often spoke of lean times. Gorok, his voice a rasp that hinted at the countless seasons he had endured, would tell tales of winters when the herds had failed to appear, when the digging for roots yielded only frozen earth, when the hunger had become a constant, agonizing companion, driving them to gnaw on the very skins they wore for warmth. He spoke of the desperation, the gnawing fear that the clan might not survive another moon. These stories, while grim, served a vital purpose. They were a stark reminder of the fragility of their existence, a chilling counterpoint to the current abundance, and a powerful lesson in the importance of not taking anything for granted. They reinforced the understanding that the current bounty was not a given, but a hard won reprieve, a temporary victory in an ongoing war against the harshness of their world. The scarcity had also bred a profound sense of community and shared responsibility. No one person was solely responsible for finding food. The hunt was a collective effort, the success of a few benefiting all. Even those who did not participate directly in the hunt contributed to the survival of the clan. The women and older children were responsible for gathering, for processing the food, for tending the fire, for maintaining the shelter. Every member, from the youngest child capable of carrying a small branch to the oldest elder who could offer wisdom and guidance, had a role to play. This interdependence was not merely a social construct, it was the very bedrock of their survival. The understanding that their individual fate was inextricably linked to the fate of the clan was a powerful motivator, ensuring that no one hoarded resources, no one shirked their duties. Lyra, though young, understood this deeply. She helped her mother prepare the hides, her small hands learning the technique of scraping, her fingers growing accustomed to the rough texture of the cured skin. She watched the hunters return, their faces etched with weariness, but also with the quiet pride of providers. She saw the careful division of the meat, the equitable distribution that ensured everyone, from the strongest warrior to the weakest infant, received their share. This was not charity. It was the essential practice of a species that understood that its survival depended on the well being of every single member. The taste of scarcity was not just a physical sensation, it was a profound lesson etched into the very fabric of their being, shaping their actions, their relationships, and their understanding of what it meant to be alive in this unforgiving epoch. It was a constant, visceral reminder of the thin, delicate line that separated them from the oblivion that lay just beyond the firelight. The very act of eating was a silent acknowledgement of this delicate balance. The ritualistic cleaving of the meat, the careful rationing, the deliberate chewing, each was a conscious act of affirming life in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a rebellion against the emptiness, a defiance of the cold, a testament to the enduring power of their will to survive. The mammoth meat, when it was gone, would be replaced by the memory of its richness, a comforting warmth in the belly that would sustain them through the lean days that would inevitably follow. The lessons learned from this abundance, the appreciation for every calorie, the understanding of the immense effort required to secure it, would be carried forward, shaping their behavior and their outlook for generations to come. They were a people defined not just by their tools or their shelters, but by the profound, unyielding hunger that taught them the true value of life and the immense, enduring strength found in their collective struggle against the gnawing cold. The fat rendered from the mammoth, poured into small stone bowls, was a liquid gold, a precious fuel that would be used sparingly to supplement the fire during the coldest nights, or rubbed into their skin to provide an additional layer of protection against the biting wind. The very act of preparing and consuming this fat was a communal ritual, a shared moment of vulnerability and resilience. Children would gather around, their eyes wide with fascination, as their mothers carefully spooned the viscous liquid onto small pieces of dried meat, offering them a taste of this concentrated energy. The simple, rich flavor was a revelation, a burst of warmth that spread through their small bodies, chasing away the lingering chill. The marrow, too, was treated with utmost respect. The hunters, with their practiced hands, would use sharpened bone fragments to pry open the marrow cavities of the larger bones, revealing the creamy, nutrient rich substance within. This was often shared among the youngest and oldest members of the clan, a gesture that underscored their deep seated sense of care and interdependence. Lyra remembered once her own small portion of marrow melting on her tongue, the sheer, unadulterated pleasure of it, a taste so rich and satisfying that it momentarily eclipsed all thoughts of the biting wind or the vastness of the frozen world outside. It was a taste of pure survival, a concentrated essence of life itself. Even the smaller bones, those deemed too small for marrow extraction, were not discarded. They were often ground down into a fine powder, mixed with water and animal fat, creating a crude but effective paste that could be used to supplement their diet, providing essential minerals and nutrients that might otherwise be lacking. This resourcefulness, this ability to extract sustenance from every conceivable part of the animal, was a hallmark of their existence. It was a testament to their deep understanding of the natural world and their unwavering determination to wring every last drop of life from it. The scarcity had, in essence, sharpened their senses, honed their instincts, and instilled in them a profound respect for the intricate web of life that sustained them. The narrative of scarcity was woven into the very fabric of their daily lives, shaping their rituals, their beliefs, and their social structures. The successful hunt, while a moment of immense relief and celebration, was also a reminder of the constant vigilance required. The memory of hunger served as a potent motivator, ensuring that no one became complacent, that everyone understood the fragility of their situation. The stories of past hardship, of lean years and desperate measures, were not merely cautionary tales. They were integral to their cultural identity, shaping their resilience and their capacity for hope. They had learned to find joy in the small victories, to appreciate the fleeting moments of abundance, and to draw strength from their shared experiences. The act of eating, therefore, was far more than a biological necessity. It was a deeply ingrained cultural practice, a ritualistic affirmation of their will to survive. It was a time for storytelling, for passing down knowledge, for reinforcing the bonds of community. As they gathered around the fire, sharing the spoils of the hunt, they were not just consuming food, they were consuming their history, their resilience, and their hope for the future. The taste of scarcity had, in a profound and transformative way, taught them the true meaning of abundance and the enduring strength of a people united in their struggle against the gnawing cold. The marrow, a symbol of concentrated life, was also a potent reminder of their connection to the earth, to the cycles of life and death that governed their world. The hunters, their hands still stained with the blood of the mammoth, would speak of the animal's spirit, of the respect they held for its sacrifice. This reverence was not a sign of weakness, but a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. They were not simply predators, they were participants in a grand ancient dance, and their survival was inextricably linked to the health and vitality of the world around them. This understanding, born from the crucible of scarcity, was perhaps their most valuable inheritance, a wisdom that would guide them through the darkest of winters and the leanest of times. The mammoth, a titan of the frozen expanse, was a force of nature made flesh. Its approach was heralded not just by the shuddering tremors that ran through the permafrost, but by a visceral, instinctual awareness that prickled the skin of every hunter. This was no mere animal. It was a moving mountain, its shaggy ochre hide a shield against the biting winds, its colossal tusks curved like predatory scythes. The air itself seemed to thicken with its presence, carrying a musky, earthy scent that spoke of ancient power and a life lived in communion with the unforgiving land. The ground vibrated with each earth shattering footfall, a percussive beat that pounded against the hunters' chests, a prelude to the symphony of coordinated terror about to unfold. When the beast finally revealed itself from the swirling snow, it was a sight that stole the breath, even from lungs already strained by the cold. A deafening roar, a sound that seemed to originate from the very core of the world, ripped across the frozen plains, a challenge hurled against the fragile human presence. The hunters, a scattering of determined figures clad in the rough furs and hides that were their only defense, moved with a speed and agility born of sheer necessity. They were not just men, they were extensions of the will to survive, their movements fluid and economical, honed by generations of facing down death. Each was a vital node in a complex, living organism, their actions dictated by an unspoken choreography of survival. Their weapons, the spears, were more than just sharpened sticks. They were the culmination of countless hours of patient craft. Each shaft, carefully selected for its strength and straightness, was the result of a quest through dense, frozen woods. The stone tips, painstakingly chipped and flaked into lethal points, were the product of meticulous selection and grinding, each facet reflecting the cunning and foresight of the artisan. These were not crude instruments, but finely tuned extensions of human intent, designed to penetrate the thickest hide, to sever muscle, to bring down a creature that dwarfed them in every conceivable way. They were hurled with all the might their lean, corded muscles could muster, trajectories calculated with an ingrained understanding of physics that defied formal education. The targets were not random. They were specific, vulnerable points. The soft underbelly, the joints where bone met muscle, the massive flank where the heart and lungs lay protected but not impregnable. The air, already frigid, grew thick with a potent cocktail of sensations. The primal musk of the charging mammoth mingled with the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline coursing through the hunter's veins. Their shouts, raw and guttural, were not expressions of bravado, but of focused intent, calls to each other that reinforced their unity and purpose. Amidst these human sounds, a new noise emerged, a sharp, sickening crack that echoed the brutal impact of stone against ivory, a sound that spoke of the immense forces being unleashed. Each thrust of a spear was a gamble, a moment where life and death were suspended in a precarious balance. It was a testament to their desperate courage, a willingness to place their own fragile existence on the line for the survival of their clan. The sheer weight of the beast, the terrifying momentum of its charge, meant that a single misstep, A moment of hesitation could lead to utter annihilation. Yet, they pressed on, their faces set in grim determination, their eyes fixed on the task, on the future of their people. Kalen, the lead hunter, felt the familiar surge of primal energy coursing through him. The blizzard, which had raged with such ferocity just hours before, had subsided into a biting wind, but the memory of its fury was etched into his senses. He saw the beast not just as a target, but as a force of nature, a living embodiment of the harsh world they inhabited. Its tusks, like polished bone sabers, were capable of rending flesh and shattering bone with a single careless sweep. He remembered the close calls, the times he had felt the air displaced by a near miss, the chilling brush of death against his skin. This hunt was not a display of bravado, but a calculated act of necessity, a brutal equation where the risk had to be weighed against the reward. The survival of his clan depended on the successful acquisition of this colossal bounty. The other hunters, a dozen strong, moved in a coordinated, fluid manner. Lyra's father, Goran, was a master of the flanking maneuver, his knowledge of the terrain allowing him to position himself for maximum impact. He saw the beast's immense power, the way its thick legs churned the snow, propelling its colossal body forward. He understood the rhythm of its charge, the slight hesitation before it committed its full weight to a particular direction. This was knowledge gained not from books or spoken lessons, but from a lifetime of observation, of instinct honed by the raw realities of survival. He felt the weight of his spear, its familiar balance a comforting presence in his hand, a promise of potential death for the magnificent creature before him. Torvin, younger and more impetuous, was positioned to draw the beast's initial attention. His role was perilous, a dance on the edge of oblivion. He would faint, darting forward, shouting and waving his arms, drawing the massive animal's gaze, creating a momentary distraction. It was a dangerous game, requiring nerves of steel and an unwavering trust in the others to exploit the opening he created. He saw the beast's massive head lower, its small, intelligent eyes fixing on him. The ground shook with its renewed surge, the air filled with the sound of its breath, a hot, wet exhalation that carried the scent of frozen earth and raw power. He felt a thrill, a terrifying exhilaration, as he dodged the first clumsy swipe of a tusk, the polished ivory flashing past him like a deadly comet. The initial volley of spears struck home, met with a guttural roar of pain and fury. The thick hide, like layered leather, absorbed some of the impact, but the sharpened stone tips found purchase, biting into muscle and sinew. The beast recoiled, shaking its massive head, dislodging one of the spears with a violent shudder. Its immense strength was a formidable adversary, capable of shrugging off blows that would fell a lesser creature. But these were not lesser men. They were survivors, and they knew that persistence, combined with cunning, was their greatest weapon. Kalen saw the beast falter, its charge momentarily disrupted. This was the moment. He yelled a sharp, clipped command, a signal that rippled through the hunters. They spread out further, using the uneven terrain, the scattered boulders, and the deep drifts of snow as cover. The strategy was not to overwhelm the beast with a single decisive blow, but to wound it, to tire it, to exploit any moment of vulnerability. It was a strategy born of a deep understanding of their own limitations and the formidable power of their prey. Each hunter carried only a few spears, and each throw had to count. The second wave of spears found their mark. One thudded into the beast's thick foreleg, causing it to stumble. Another struck its flank, eliciting a bellow of agony that was almost human in its intensity. The blood, dark and viscous, began to stain the snow, a grim testament to the effectiveness of their attack. But the beast was far from defeated. With a furious roar, it wheeled, its massive tail lashing out, sending snow and ice flying. It was a chaotic ballet of survival, the hunters weaving and dodging, their movements dictated by the beast's unpredictable rage. Goron, seeing an opening, darted from behind a snow-laden boulder. He held his spear low, aiming for the exposed underside of the mammoth's belly. The creature, sensing the threat, tried to turn, but its injured leg buckled. Goran unleashed his spear with all his might. The shaft flew true, and the stone point sank deep into the beast's flesh. A searing pain shot through the mammoth, and it let out a bellow that shook the very air. It thrashed wildly, its tusks gouging the frozen earth, its massive form shuddering with the force of its agony. Torvin, ever the opportunist, saw the beast's momentary disorientation. He sprinted forward, another spear clutched in his hand, and hurled it with precision at the base of the mammoth's neck. The spear lodged itself deeply, severing a vital artery. The flow of blood increased, painting a macabre trail across the pristine white landscape. The beast's movements became more sluggish, its roars less powerful, replaced by ragged, wheezing breaths. The hunters continued their relentless assault, each throw a prayer, each impact a small victory. They were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, their courage amplified by the shared purpose of survival. The dance with danger was an ancient one, a ritual passed down through generations, etched into their very being. They were the inheritors of a legacy of survival, and in this moment, against this magnificent, terrible beast, they were proving their worth. The wind continued to howl, a mournful accompaniment to the brutal struggle, but within the hearts of these hunters, a fierce determination burned, a fire that even the harshest of winters could not extinguish. The ground, churned and bloody, was a testament to their skill and their unwavering will to conquer the elements and the formidable creatures that roamed them. Every muscle in their bodies screamed with exertion. Every breath was a conscious effort, yet they pressed on, driven by the primal instinct to provide, to protect, to survive. The mammoth, a symbol of both immense power and life-giving sustenance, was slowly being brought to its knees, a testament to the enduring strength of a people who understood the true meaning of collaboration and the raw, unyielding power of unity. The spears, once gleaming in the weak sunlight, were now dark with the lifeblood of the ancient creature, each one a marker of a battle hard fought and a future secured. The wind, which had been a mere annoyance hours before, now shrieked like a tormented spirit, its icy tendrils clawing at every exposed surface. Kalen, his face already raw from the earlier onslaught, watched as the world dissolved into a maelstrom of white. The blizzard had returned, not with the gradual encroachment of a creeping fog, but with the sudden, violent fury of a provoked beast. Visibility, already compromised by the failing light and the lingering snow from the mammoth hunt, vanished completely. The swirling flakes, driven by the gale, became an impenetrable curtain, reducing the familiar landscape to an abstract, blinding chaos. To the caves, now, Kalen's voice, though strained, cut through the rising din. The guttural roars and bellowing of the mammoth were a fading memory, replaced by a more insidious, pervasive threat. The hunt, though successful, had left them exposed, their bodies still radiating the heat of exertion, their clothing damp with sweat and the beast's blood. This was a cruel irony. The very energy they had expended to secure their future now made them more susceptible to the immediate dangers of the storm. The retreat was not a leisurely walk. It was a desperate scramble, a primal instinct to seek shelter, overriding all other considerations. Each hunter, their faces grim, adjusted their grip on their weapons, not out of habit from the hunt, but as a reflex against the unseen dangers the storm might conceal. The snow, which had been a blanket of white, now felt like 1,000 tiny needles, driven by a force that seemed intent on scouring them from the face of the earth. The wind battered them, pushing and shoving, threatening to tear them from their feet and tumble them into the swirling abyss. Lyra, her small frame huddled close to her father, Goron, felt the immense power of the storm pressing in on them. The ground beneath their feet, moments ago solid and predictable, was now a shifting, treacherous surface. Drifts, deep and unpredictable, lay in wait, ready to swallow them whole. The familiar landmarks that guided them through the daylight hours were erased, leaving them to navigate by feel, by instinct, and by the desperate hope that they remembered the path correctly. Each step was a gamble, a prayer that the ground would hold, that the snow would not betray them. Torvin, his usual boisterousness subdued, moved with a grim efficiency, his eyes scanning the impenetrable white for any sign of his comrades. The blizzard was a disorienting enemy, capable of separating even the closest of companions in an instant. The chilling realization that a wrong turn, a moment of lost footing, could mean being left behind, alone and vulnerable, spurred him onward. He heard the faint, rhythmic crunch of boots on snow, a sound that was both reassuring and a constant reminder of the effort required just to stay upright. The cave, their sanctuary, loomed in Kalen's mind, a beacon of warmth and safety in the face of the encroaching frigid darkness. But the distance felt impossibly vast, each yard a monumental struggle against the elements. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, a creeping lethargy that threatened to sap his will. The thought of the fire, the life-giving heart of their temporary home, became an obsession. Without it, their struggle would be short-lived and brutal. As they neared the cave's entrance, the wind seemed to redouble its efforts, a final, desperate attempt to keep them from their refuge. The opening, a dark maw in the cliff face, was already partially obscured by a growing drift. It was a race against time, a desperate push through the thickening snow, each hunter lending their strength to help the others. Kalen, the last to enter, felt the full force of the blizzard as he dove through the narrow opening, the sound of its fury abruptly muffled as the snow-laden firs of the entrance fell back into place behind him. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth, a welcome contrast to the biting cold outside. But the warmth was precarious. The central fire, The focal point of their huddled existence was dwindling. Its flames, once vibrant and licking high, now sputtered and gasped, their light dimming as the wind, finding its way through unseen crevices, attempted to snuff them out. The task of rekindling the fire, of ensuring its survival, fell to the most capable, the most resolute. Kalen immediately moved to the hearth, his movements economical and driven by a desperate urgency. The carefully gathered fuel, the dried grasses and twigs, the larger pieces of wood scavenged from the edge of the forest were all laid out, but the wind, even within the cave, was a constant adversary. He shielded the fragile embers with his body, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts as he coaxed the reluctant flames. Lyra, seeing his struggle, brought him more dry tinder, her small hands working with a surprising steadiness, her eyes wide with a fear that she tried valiantly to conceal. Goran and Torvin worked to reinforce the entrance, piling more furs and snow against the opening, seeking to create a more substantial barrier against the relentless storm. The wind's mournful cry, though somewhat muted, was still a constant reminder of the world outside, a world that now threatened to engulf them. The success of the mammoth hunt, the promise of sustenance for the coming days, felt almost meaningless in the face of this immediate, all consuming threat. As Kalen finally managed to coax a sustained flame from the embers, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the clan. The fire, weak at first, grew stronger, its flickering light pushing back the encroaching shadows and offering a fragile promise of warmth. The hunters, their faces etched with exhaustion and the lingering chill, began to shed their outer layers, the damp furs a testament to their arduous journey. They gathered closer to the fire, a huddled mass seeking solace in proximity. The primal fear that had gripped them outside now manifested as a profound, almost unnerving silence. They listened to the tempest rage, the howl of the wind a constant, terrifying symphony. Each gust seemed to press against the very rock of their shelter, a physical manifestation of the immense power of nature. It was a humbling experience, a stark reminder of their insignificance in the grand scheme of things. Lyra, nestled beside her father, watched the flames dance, her eyes reflecting their unsteady glow. She remembered her mother, lost to a similar storm years ago. The memory was a cold, sharp thing, and she instinctively drew closer to Goran, burying her face in the rough wool of his tunic. Goran placed a reassuring arm around her, his own gaze fixed on the fire, his mind no doubt replaying the harsh lessons of survival that had been burned into him by the unforgiving land. The blizzard raged for hours, its fury undiminished. The cave, while offering protection, could not entirely insulate them from the storm's percussive assault. The constant roar of the wind, the occasional terrifying crack of ice or rock shifting under the strain, kept them on edge. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and shallow, punctuated by the sounds of the storm and the ever-present need to keep the fire alive. Kalen, despite his weariness, remained vigilant. He stoked the fire, added fuel, and kept a watchful eye on the entrance, listening for any change in the storm's demeanor. He knew that the true test was not just surviving the initial onslaught, but enduring the long, cold hours that followed. The blizzard was a trial by ordeal, a test of their resilience, their ingenuity, and their unwavering commitment to one another. The mammoth was a conquest, a victory over the wild, but the blizzard was a battle against the very forces that shaped their world, a battle that demanded a different kind of strength, a deeper, more fundamental courage. The knowledge that their lives depended on the continuous struggle against the cold, on the unwavering maintenance of their small, flickering beacon of warmth, settled upon them, heavy and profound. The storm outside was a tangible enemy, a force that sought to extinguish them, and within the cave, their collective will to survive was the only shield they possessed. The crackle of the fire, the murmur of hushed voices, the rhythmic breathing of the clan, all became a counterpoint to the wild symphony of the blizzard, a testament to the enduring flame of human life in the face of overwhelming elemental fury. The fragile ember of their fire, painstakingly nurtured through the teeth chattering grip of the night, was suddenly, irrevocably scattered. It was a single, careless movement, perhaps a shifting of weight on the damp earth floor, or a sudden, violent gust of wind finding a new, insidious route through their carefully reinforced entrance. Whatever the cause, the result was a chilling cascade of dying sparks, each a tiny fleeting testament to their lost warmth and light. The heart of their sanctuary, the very source of their defiance against the encroaching frost, was extinguished. Panic, cold and sharp, flared amongst the huddled figures. The immediate, terrifying realization that their hard-won warmth and the comforting glow of light were vanishing sent a wave of despair through the clan. The hours that followed were a desperate, bone-chilling ordeal. They scrabbled in the dimness, their fingers numb and clumsy, fumbling with damp, brittle tinder and trying to coax a new flame from the reluctant materials. Hope, like the embers, began to dim with the fading light. This small, yet catastrophic failure underscored the razor's edge on which their survival constantly teetered. Goran, his face a mask of grim determination in the gloom, was the first to react. He reached out, his large, calloused hands attempting to gather the scattered remnants of their fire. But the wind, an unseen but ever-present antagonist, seemed to conspire against him, fanning the dying sparks into oblivion with each breath that slithered into the cave. He grunted in frustration, his usual steady demeanor faltering for a moment. He knew, with a primal certainty that resonated in his very bones, the gravity of this moment. The mammoth was a feast, a promise of sustenance for weeks to come, but without fire, that promise was as insubstantial as the swirling snow outside. Raw meat would not sustain them. It would offer little warmth against the relentless cold. Lyra, sensing her father's distress, crawled closer, her small hands instinctively reaching for the tinder Kalen had painstakingly arranged earlier. Her fingers, still stiff with the lingering cold, fumbled with the dry grasses and bark shavings. She tried to shield them with her body, a futile gesture against the pervasive chill that now seemed to creep from the very stones of the cave. The flickering light that had been their shield against the darkness was gone, replaced by a deepening twilight that threatened to swallow them whole. She shivered, not entirely from the cold, but from a burgeoning fear that was a more potent chill. She remembered her mother's words, whispered in the hushed reverence of their traditions. Fire is life. Without it, we are but shadows, waiting to be erased. Kalen, His breath, coming in shallow, ragged gasps, joined Goran in the frantic effort. He took a different approach, drawing upon his intimate knowledge of flame and fuel. He sought out the driest pieces of wood he could find, breaking them into smaller, more manageable fragments. He meticulously scraped away the damp outer layers of bark, exposing the drier wood beneath. Each movement was deliberate, a prayer against the encroaching cold. He remembered the lessons of his own father, a man who had faced down blizzards and famine with a quiet resilience. Never surrender your tinder to the damp, he had always said. Guard it as you would your own breath. The clan watched, their faces etched with a mixture of anxiety and a desperate, nascent hope. They could feel the temperature dropping, the warmth that had seeped into their bones from the fire now being leached away by the cold. The silence within the cave was no longer one of peaceful respite, but a tense, expectant hush, broken only by the scraping of wood and the frustrated sighs of those trying to rekindle the precious flame. Every gust of wind that rattled the firs at the entrance sent a fresh wave of unease through them. The storm outside, which had seemed a distant, albeit powerful force, now felt like an encroaching enemy, its icy breath seeping into their very sanctuary. Torvin, usually the first to offer a jest or a word of encouragement, was subdued. He moved among the others, his own hands numb as he tried to offer what little warmth he could by pressing closer. He shared his own meager store of dry leaves, a small contribution to the collective effort. His gaze kept flicking towards the entrance, a subconscious vigilance born of countless nights spent facing the wild. He knew that if they failed to reignite the fire, their situation would become perilous, forcing them to rely solely on their body heat and the dwindling reserves of their own strength. The success of the hunt felt distant, almost irrelevant, in the face of this immediate, elemental threat. Kalen found a small piece of wood that had been tucked deeper into his pouch, protected from the immediate dampness. It was dry, almost brittle. He took out his striking stone and flint, the familiar weight a small comfort in his trembling hand. He held the tinder bundle close, shielding it with his cupped hands. He struck the flint with practiced precision, a shower of sparks erupting from the impact. One spark, then another, landed on the dry fibers. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The sparks flared, then died, swallowed by the damp air. A collective groan went through the clan, but Kalen persisted. He adjusted his grip, his focus absolute. He struck again, a more forceful blow. A brighter spark flew, and this time it caught. A tiny wisp of smoke curled upwards, a fragile tendril of hope. He blew gently, carefully, his breath a controlled puff, nurturing the nascent flame. The smoke thickened, and then a glorious, albeit minuscule ember glowed, a tiny beacon in the deepening gloom. He brought it to the carefully prepared tinder, his movements slow and deliberate. He added more dry grass, more tiny twigs, feeding the fragile life. Lyra watched, her eyes wide with anticipation. She saw the faint glow grow, a small, steady pulse of warmth. She held her breath, her small body tensed. Goran's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Kalen continued to feed the flame, his brow furrowed in concentration. He added larger pieces of wood, gradually building the fire. The initial struggle was over, But the battle for warmth was far from won. The wood was still damp, and the wind, though lessened, was a constant threat, a reminder of the precariousness of their victory. The first lick of real flame was a moment of profound relief. It caught the larger twigs, then the smaller branches, and began to climb, a hesitant dance of orange and red. The light, weak at first, began to push back the oppressive darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the cave walls. The temperature, which had begun to dip to dangerously low levels, slowly started to climb. A collective sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, swept through the clan. The fire was reborn, a testament to their resilience and Kalen's skill. But the ordeal had left its mark. The hours spent in the biting cold, the fear of utter darkness and freezing, had drained them. Their fingers were still stiff, their bodies aching. The dampness had seeped into their furs, and though the fire offered warmth, the chilling dampness remained, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. They huddled closer to the rekindled blaze, seeking to absorb its precious heat, to thaw their frozen limbs. The sounds of the storm outside, the howling wind and the occasional creak of ice, seemed more menacing now, a stark contrast to the fragile safety of their renewed fire. The experience served as a stark lesson. The successful hunt, a moment of triumph, had been almost overshadowed by the near catastrophe of a lost fire. It was a brutal reminder that their survival was a continuous, multifaceted struggle. The skills required to hunt, to track, to kill a mammoth were crucial, but so too were the mundane, yet vital arts of fire making, of fuel gathering, of shelter maintenance. Each element was interconnected, a chain that, if broken, could lead to their demise. As the fire grew stronger, Kalen added larger pieces of wood, ensuring a steady, enduring flame. He knew that the night was far from over, and the storm's fury could yet return with renewed vigor. He kept a watchful eye on the entrance, on the small gaps through which the wind still managed to whisper its chilling threats. He saw the relief on the faces of his clan, the return of a fragile hope in their eyes. Lyra, no longer shivering, was now watching the flames with a quiet fascination, her earlier fear replaced by a child's awe at the power and beauty of the fire. Goron, his arms still around Lyra, met Kalen's gaze. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a shared understanding of the ordeal they had just endured. The near loss of the fire had forged a deeper respect for its importance, a renewed appreciation for the simple act of keeping it alive. It was more than just warmth. It was a symbol of their perseverance, a beacon of defiance against the harsh realities of their world. They had faced a significant challenge, and through their collective effort had overcome it. But the memory of the fading embers, of the encroaching cold, would serve as a constant, potent reminder of how easily their hard-won existence could be extinguished. The dance with danger had shown them once again how thin the veil was between survival and oblivion. The fire, now burning brightly, was not just a source of heat. It was a symbol of their enduring will, a testament to their refusal to be defeated by the elements. They had danced with danger, and though they had stumbled, they had not fallen. The flame, against all odds, still burned. The memory of the rekindled fire was still a warm hum in their veins, a potent antidote to the icy grip of the recent past. Yet, as their weary bodies settled back into the comforting routine of guarding the flames and tending to the mammoth meat, a new, more primal fear began to stir. It was a fear as old as the mountains themselves, a dread born from the very earth that cradled their temporary sanctuary. The Ice Age was not merely a season of biting winds and relentless snow. It was an era of constant geological unrest, a time when the ground beneath their feet was a fickle and unreliable foundation. This awareness, a low grade thrum of anxiety that had always been a part of their lives, now felt amplified, a chilling premonition whispering through the cave. The ancient world was a canvas of immense, slow moving forces, but it was also a world prone to sudden, violent outbursts. The immense weight of the glaciers, miles thick in places, exerted unimaginable pressure, shifting tectonic plates with a groaning reluctance that occasionally manifested as earth shattering tremors. These were not the gentle rustlings of a disturbed den, but titanic convulsions that could reshape landscapes in the blink of an eye. For the clan, accustomed to the relative stability of their cave, such events were a profound reminder of their utter insignificance in the grand, brutal theater of geological time. They lived with the constant, gnawing awareness that the solid rock around them, their perceived fortress against the elements, could at any moment betray them. Lyra, her small hands now accustomed to the feel of dry tinder and the warmth of the rekindled fire, would sometimes pause, her gaze drifting to the cave ceiling. She would trace the natural fissures and cracks in the rock, imagining them as scars from some ancient, colossal struggle. Her young mind, filled with the lore of their elders, conjured images of the earth itself groaning and tearing apart. She remembered stories of mountains being born and valleys being rent open in the blink of an eye, tales that painted a picture of a world far more dynamic and terrifying than the familiar frozen expanse they knew. These whispers of geological upheaval were not just abstract legends, they were woven into the very fabric of their existence, influencing their choice of shelter, their understanding of the world, and their deep seated respect for the raw power of nature. The consequences of such tremors were manifold and devastating. A powerful jolt could send tons of rock crashing down, sealing off entrances, burying their precious stores of dried meat and berries, or in the most horrifying scenarios, crushing the unwary where they stood. The cave, their haven, could become their tomb. They had learned, through generations of hard won experience, to assess the stability of their chosen dwelling. They sought out caves with solid bedrock, avoiding those with precarious overhangs or areas showing signs of recent collapse. They understood the subtle language of the earth, the faint groans of shifting rock, the dust that might betray instability, the unnatural silence that could precede a violent tremor. Goran, his formidable strength honed by countless hunts, carried the weight of this awareness more heavily than most. He was the protector, the one responsible for the safety and well-being of his clan. His keen eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, not just for the telltale signs of predators, but for the more insidious threats posed by the very ground they occupied. He had witnessed, in his youth, the aftermath of a significant tremor that had sent a section of a cliff face tumbling into a nearby river valley, obliterating a small herd of reindeer that had been grazing there. The memory of the sudden, violent chaos, the thunderous roar of falling rock, and the subsequent silence that followed was etched into his mind. It served as a constant, stark reminder of the fragility of their existence, a lesson that even the most formidable strength could be rendered useless by the Earth's unleashed fury. Kalen, with his analytical mind, approached the threat of tremors with a different kind of caution. He studied the patterns of the rock, the strata that revealed the Earth's long history. He understood that the mountains were not static entities, but were constantly being shaped by immense forces. He would often run his hands over the rough surfaces of the cave, feeling the subtle contours, the ancient flow lines that spoke of immense pressures and unimaginable timescales. His knowledge, passed down from his father, emphasized the importance of understanding the environment in its entirety, not just the immediate threats. He knew that a stable cave today might be a death trap tomorrow if the underlying geological structures were compromised. The clan's nomadic lifestyle was, in part, a response to this inherent instability. While they sought shelter in caves for protection against the elements, they also understood the need to be prepared to move on. A cave that had once been a safe haven could, after a significant tremor, become a place of extreme danger. They maintained a constant vigilance, always ready to pack their meager belongings and seek out a new, more stable location. This adaptability was not a weakness, but a testament to their resilience, their ability to read the subtle signs of a changing world and to respond with swift, decisive action. The very act of preparing for the long winter, of securing the mammoth meat and reinforcing their shelter, was undertaken with an underlying awareness of the earth's capricious nature. They knew that a well stocked larder and a strong fire could be rendered irrelevant by a sudden seismic event. This knowledge fostered a peculiar kind of fatalism, a stoic acceptance of forces far beyond their control. It was not a passive resignation, but a deep understanding that true survival lay not only in conquering the external elements, but also in respecting and adapting to the fundamental forces that shaped their world. There were times, during the deepest nights, when a faint rumbling could be felt through the very bones of the earth, a subtle vibration that set the pebbles on the cave floor dancing. On such occasions, a hush would fall over the clan. Even the crackling of the fire seemed to momentarily recede, as if acknowledging the more profound symphony of the planet's unrest. Children would stir, seeking the reassuring presence of their parents, their young minds attuned to the disquieting tremors that adults tried to mask with calm reassurances. Goran would often stand at the cave entrance, his gaze fixed on the inky blackness outside, listening to the subtle shifts in the wind and the distant groans that might or might not be the herald of something more significant. The fear of a cave-in was a constant, unspoken companion. It was the dread of being trapped, of the air growing thick and suffocating, of the slow, agonizing process of starvation or thirst. It was the terror of being buried alive, the darkness absolute and eternal. This fear drove their meticulous attention to detail in fortifying their shelter, in clearing away loose rocks, and in ensuring that their pathways in and out of the cave were always maintained. Every discarded stone, every painstakingly chipped fragment of ice, was not just part of their daily routine. It was a small act of defiance against the possibility of entombment. The mammoth hunt, while a monumental achievement, also underscored their vulnerability. The very act of bringing down such a massive creature involved significant exertion and potential for injury. But now, as they processed the meat and prepared for the long haul, the ground beneath them felt like a less trustworthy ally. The weight of the mammoth carcasses, the collective efforts of the clan to transport and butcher the immense beasts, could inadvertently trigger localized shifts in the earth, especially if they were in an area prone to instability. It was a delicate balance, a constant negotiation with the very ground that sustained them. Their reliance on the cave as a refuge was both a blessing and a curse. It offered protection from the blizzard's fury, a place to warm their bodies and store their food, but it also made them acutely vulnerable to seismic activity. An open plain, while exposed, might offer the chance to flee before a major collapse. A cave, however, could become an inescapable trap. This inherent risk was a constant factor in their decision making, a silent question mark hanging over every choice of dwelling. The Earth's tremors were not always violent and destructive. Sometimes they were subtle, fleeting, a faint vibration that could be mistaken for the distant roar of wind or the echo of a falling icicle. Yet, these subtle signs were enough to raise their collective consciousness. They were reminders that the world was alive, dynamic, and capable of immense, unpredictable power. The ice itself, a seemingly solid and immutable force, was also subject to movement and pressure, its immense weight contributing to the geological stresses that could culminate in an earthquake. The lessons of the earth were taught not through words, but through experience. The stories of past collapses, of caves rendered uninhabitable, were passed down not as mere cautionary tales, but as practical knowledge imprinted upon their collective memory. They knew that the seemingly stable rock was, in fact, a living, breathing entity, subject to the same relentless forces that govern the winds and the rivers. This profound respect for the earth's power shaped their worldview, instilling in them a humility and a reverence for the natural world that was essential for their survival. They were not masters of their environment, but rather participants in a grand, often perilous dance with forces that dwarfed their own. The ground beneath their feet was not merely a surface upon which to tread, but a powerful, ancient being that demanded constant awareness, respect, and a readiness to adapt to its every whim. The earth, in its silent, subterranean movements, was another great danger they had to learn to read, to anticipate, and to respect. Even amidst the teeth-chattering cold and the gnawing hunger, the clan found ways to inject a spark of levity into their harsh existence. It was a peculiar brand of humor, born from the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of their situation. Laughter, when it came, was often a sharp, unexpected bark, a release valve for the immense pressure of constant peril. It was the humor of the absurd, a coping mechanism forged in the crucible of the Ice Age, a testament to their indomitable spirit. Consider the time when young Ilara, eager to prove her worth as a gatherer, had spent an entire morning meticulously tracking a plump vole. She'd stalked it through the snow-dusted scrub, her small body a study in focused tension, her mind filled with visions of roasted vole for the evening meal. The chase had been a masterpiece of stealth and agility, a miniature drama playing out against the vast, indifferent canvas of the frozen tundra. She'd finally cornered the creature near a patch of frozen earth, her heart pounding a triumphant rhythm. With a final determined lunge, she'd thrown her woven basket over the unsuspecting rodent. A moment of triumph. Then the vole, with an almost defiant squeak, had wriggled through a tiny gap at the bottom of the basket, disappearing into the frozen ground as if it had been a phantom all along. Ilara's crestfallen expression, the utter bewilderment on her face as she stared at the empty basket, had been so comically anticlimactic that Lyra, perched on a nearby rock, had let out a snort of laughter. The sound, so out of place in the hushed stillness, had startled Goran, who was keeping watch. He'd turned, his brow furrowed, only to see Alara's shoulders shake with a reluctant giggle. Soon, Lyra's giggle turned into a full-blown chortle, and the shared absurdity of the moment broke through the ever-present tension. Goran, despite himself, felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth. He'd seen it all before: the meticulous planning, the breathless pursuit, the inevitable, often ridiculous failure. The vole, a creature so small and insignificant, had managed to outwit their best efforts, a tiny monarch of the frozen earth. It was a victory for the absurd, a testament to the fact that even in survival, the universe often found it amusing to pull the rug out from under their feet. Then there was the ongoing, low-grade feud between Old Man Torvin and a particularly recalcitrant piece of flint. Torvin, his hands gnarled and weathered like ancient roots, was the clan's primary fire starter. For generations, his lineage had possessed the knack, the almost mystical ability, to coax flame from stone. But this particular piece of flint, chipped from a quarry near the glacial edge, seemed to possess a will of its own. Torvin would sit by the fire pit, patiently striking it against a piece of iron pyrite, his brow furrowed in concentration, his muttered curses a constant soundtrack to their evenings. Sparks would fly, sometimes spectacularly, sometimes in pathetic, dying embers, but a true flame, a robust, life-sustaining fire, remained elusive. The clan would watch, a mixture of impatience and reluctant amusement on their faces. So, still wrestling with the stubborn rock, Torvin? Kalen might inquire, his voice laced with a hint of teasing. Torvin would glare, his jaw set. This one, he'd grumble, holds the cold in its very heart. It defies the warmth, the light. It is a stone of defiance. The clan understood. Every tool, every resource had its own personality, its own stubborn streak, and this piece of flint was a particularly egregious offender. The absurdity lay in the sheer tenacity of both man and stone, locked in a silent elemental battle for dominance. When, after an agonizingly long period, Torvin finally succeeded in igniting a small, flickering flame, the cheers that went up were not just for the fire, but for the symbolic victory over the unyielding nature of their world. It was a testament to the human will, and to the sheer, stubborn refusal to be beaten, even by a rock. The sheer inefficiency of some of their survival methods could also elicit wry smiles. The laborious process of chipping away at a block of ice to melt it for drinking water, for instance. It was a task that required immense patience and a constant expenditure of energy, often in conditions that would sap the strength of the hardiest individual. Yet they persisted. One particularly frigid afternoon, as young Finn struggled with a particularly dense chunk of ice, his teeth chattering uncontrollably, He'd let out a sound that was half groan, half sigh. If only, he'd panted, his breath misting in the frigid air, this ice would just unfreeze itself. The sheer fantastical wish, so utterly divorced from the reality of their existence, had a way of cutting through the bleakness. Lyra, who had been nearby gathering dry moss, had burst out laughing. Finn, she'd exclaimed, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye, if the ice unfroze itself, we'd have nothing to do all day. The observation, while absurdly true, highlighted the fundamental paradox of their lives. Their survival depended on their labor, on their constant struggle against the elements. The idea of a world where such tasks were effortless was a pleasant, yet impossible fantasy. It was in these moments, acknowledging the sheer laboriousness of their existence, that they found a strange kinship, a shared understanding of the arduous path they walked. Even the mammoth hunts, while fraught with danger and demanding immense skill, could provide moments of the absurd. The sheer, unwieldy size of the beasts themselves was a source of endless, if grim, amusement. The logistical nightmare of transporting such a colossal animal, the hours spent hacking at frozen flesh with rudimentary tools, the constant threat of scavengers drawn by the scent of blood, it was a scenario that, if viewed from a detached perspective, bordered on the farcical. One memorable occasion, after a particularly brutal hunt that had left several clan members bruised and exhausted, they'd managed to wrestle the massive carcass onto a makeshift sledge. As they began the arduous journey back to their shelter, the sledge, overloaded and unevenly balanced, had promptly tipped over, sending the mammoth's enormous head rolling down a slight incline, coming to rest at the feet of a startled ptarmigan. The ptarmigan, a creature of considerable timidity, had puffed itself up, seemingly affronted by the sudden appearance of this colossal, silent observer, before flapping away in a flurry of white feathers. The clan, momentarily stunned by the sudden, undignified tumble, had erupted in laughter. Goron, leaning on his spear, had watched the spectacle with a weary but amused glint in his eye. Even the mammoths, he'd declared, his voice rough but carrying the weight of shared experience, can't seem to keep their balance when they're dead. It was a recognition of their own struggles, their own occasional clumsiness in the face of overwhelming challenges. The mammoth, a symbol of their strength and resourcefulness, had in its final moments provided a moment of pure, unadulterated, and entirely accidental slapstick. The constant awareness of their vulnerability could also breed a certain dark humor, the understanding that a single misstep, a moment of inattention, could mean the end. This was particularly evident when it came to navigating treacherous terrain, the icy slopes, the precarious ledges, the hidden crevasses. Each step was a calculated risk. Lyra remembered one instance when Kalen, ever the pragmatist, had been demonstrating the proper technique for traversing a particularly slippery incline. He'd stressed the importance of angling one's feet, of using a walking stick for balance, of maintaining a low center of gravity. Mid-sentence, as if to emphasize his point, his foot had slipped. He hadn't fallen, not completely. He'd managed to flail his arms wildly, his walking stick digging into the ice, his body contorting into a most ungraceful pose. For a fleeting second, he'd looked like a grotesque, wind-up toy about to topple. The clan had held their breath. Then, with a grunt of effort, He'd regained his footing, his face flushed. He'd cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. As I was saying, he'd continued, his voice a little strained, the importance of controlled movement. The almost imperceptible tremor that ran through the clan's assembled members, a collective sigh of relief mixed with amusement, spoke volumes. They knew the risks. They lived with them every day. But the sheer, unscripted drama of Kalen's near tumble, the unspoken understanding that any of them could have been in that position, had provided a brief, albeit dark, moment of shared humor. It was the humor of acknowledging their fragility, of recognizing that even the most cautious among them could be brought low by the capricious nature of their environment. These fleeting moments of mirth were not born of a lack of seriousness, but from a profound understanding of the sheer, often overwhelming gravity of their existence. They were not dismissive of the dangers. Rather, they found a way to acknowledge them, to process them, and to continue moving forward. It was a resilience that manifested not only in their physical endurance, but also in their capacity for finding the absurd amidst the dire. In the flickering firelight, under the watchful eyes of a sky often devoid of stars, these shared laughs, these wry observations, were more than just diversions. They were affirmations, affirmations that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they were still alive, still human, and still capable of finding a sliver of light in the deepest darkness. The humor of the absurd was their quiet rebellion, their whispered defiance against a world that constantly threatened to crush them. It was the sound of life, persistent and irrepressible, echoing in the heart of the Ice Age. The biting winds that sculpted the frozen landscape were a constant, unforgiving presence. Yet within this harsh embrace, a remarkable tapestry of ingenuity began to weave itself. Survival was not merely a passive state of enduring, it was an active, relentless pursuit, demanding an almost ceaseless wellspring of creativity from the clan. Every challenge, from the most mundane to the most perilous, was met with a spark of innovation, a testament to the unyielding spirit that pulsed through their veins. This ingenuity was not a sudden, brilliant flash, but a slow, organic growth, etched into the very fabric of their daily existence. Consider the ubiquitous problem of water. In an environment where liquid water was a precious, ephemeral luxury, often locked away beneath a thick mantle of ice, the clan had developed a sophisticated, albeit primitive, understanding of its properties. Beyond the laborious but necessary task of chipping away at frozen deposits, they discovered the remarkable insulating and absorbent qualities of wet moss. This seemingly humble plant, often found clinging stubbornly to rocks or the leeward sides of ancient trees, became a vital component in their water management. They learned to pack damp moss around containers, a natural insulation that slowed the rate at which their precious water reserves would freeze during the frigid nights. More than just an insulator, however, this moss also possessed a subtle filtering capability. By layering it within woven baskets or hollowed out logs, and then slowly pouring water through, they could achieve a rudimentary form of purification. While it wouldn't eliminate all impurities, it significantly reduced the gritty sediment and particulate matter that could make even clean meltwater unpalatable and perhaps more importantly, unhealthy. This was not a learned skill from some ancient tome, but a hard won wisdom passed down through generations of observation and careful experimentation, a quiet understanding born from the desperate need to coax life sustaining sustenance from a parched and frozen world. The protection afforded by animal hides was paramount, a bulwark against the relentless assault of the cold. Yet, the transformation of a raw hide into wearable, protective armor was a complex and demanding undertaking, requiring a profound understanding of the materials and a meticulous application of ancient techniques. The initial scraping of the hide was a painstaking process, utilizing sharpened flints and bone scrapers to remove every trace of flesh, fat, and membrane. This was not a task for the faint of heart or the weak of hand. It demanded hours of strenuous effort, the repetitive motion of scraping a constant rhythmic pulse against the stillness of the world. Once thoroughly cleaned, the hides underwent a process known as tanning, a method that rendered them supple and resistant to decay. The most effective, though perhaps the most visceral, tanning agent available to them was brain matter. The lipid rich tissues of the animal's brain were mashed and worked into the scraped hide, a greasy, potent substance that permeated the fibers, preventing them from becoming brittle and stiff. This was a technique that spoke volumes about their deep connection to the animals they hunted. Every part of the creature was utilized, its very essence contributing to the survival of the clan. Once tanned, the hides were then meticulously stitched together. The needles themselves were marvels of miniaturized engineering, painstakingly carved from bone, the sturdy femurs of deer or the sharp phalanges of larger game. These needles, smoothed and sharpened, possessed an uncanny ability to pierce the tough, treated hide. The thread, equally vital, was derived from the sinews of animals, long fibrous strands that ran along their muscles. These sinews, when dried and carefully separated, could be twisted and braided into surprisingly strong cords, capable of withstanding the stresses of constant wear. The act of sewing was not a hurried affair. Each stitch was placed with deliberate care, ensuring a tight, secure seam that would prevent precious body heat from escaping and the frigid air from penetrating. The resulting garments were not mere coverings. They were a second skin, a testament to the clan's ability to harness the raw power of nature and reshape it into a form that fostered life. They understood the importance of layering, of creating air pockets within their clothing that would trap insulating warmth. The fit was crucial. Too loose, and the wind would find its way in. Too tight, and it would restrict movement and circulation, a potentially fatal flaw in their unforgiving environment. Even the simple act of transporting water, a daily necessity that could easily become a logistical hurdle, was a showcase of their resourcefulness. They had learned to identify and utilize natural containers that could be adapted for their needs. Certain gourds, when dried and hollowed out, provided a surprisingly robust and lightweight vessel. More commonly, however, they relied on the bladders of larger animals, meticulously cleaned and treated to prevent leakage. These bladders, when carefully inflated and tied off, created flexible, impermeable containers that could be slung over the shoulder or carried in a bundle. The shapes were not always aesthetically pleasing, often dictated by the natural contours of the organ, but their functionality was undeniable. Some might be crudely shaped into a more recognizable bag form, while others retained a more organic, bulbous appearance. The sheer ingenuity lay in their ability to see potential in the discarded, to transform what might be considered waste into essential tools. These were not items of luxury or adornment, but humble, life sustaining implements born from a deep well of practical knowledge. The creation of tools and weapons further underscored their adaptive intelligence. While stone tools were their primary implements, the constant need for sharp edges and functional implements drove a relentless process of refinement. Flint knapping, the art of shaping stone, was a skill honed over countless hours. They understood the conchoidal fracture pattern of certain stones, allowing them to chip away flakes with precision, creating sharp cutting edges for knives and scrapers, sturdy points for spears, and effective blades for axes. The selection of the right type of stone was critical. A dense, fine grained chert or obsidian was preferred for its sharpness and ability to hold an edge. Even the hafting of these stone tools to wooden handles or shafts was a feat of engineering. Sinew, warmed and stretched, would be used to lash the stone head securely to the wood, creating a surprisingly durable bond that could withstand considerable force. When the sinew dried, it would contract, drawing the stone even tighter to the haft. Their shelters, while often utilizing natural caves or overhangs, were also improved through deliberate, ingenious construction. The weaving of branches and animal hides, often reinforced with mud and packed snow, created windbreaks and added layers of insulation. They understood the importance of ventilation, ensuring that smoke from their hearths could escape while still retaining as much warmth as possible. The placement of their shelters was also a strategic decision, often taking into account prevailing wind patterns, proximity to water sources, and defensive vantage points. Even their methods of fire starting, while seemingly simple, were refined over time. The reliable combination of iron pyrite and flint, as previously mentioned, was their primary method, but the knowledge of where to find the best quality pyrite and how to strike the flint at the correct angle to produce a consistent shower of sparks was a skill that required practice and understanding. They also learned to prepare tinder with great care. Dried grasses, finely scraped bark, or the downy seeds of certain plants, all meticulously gathered and kept dry, ready to catch the precious spark and bloom into flame. The creation of a safe and efficient hearth was also a consideration, often a carefully constructed ring of stones designed to reflect heat back into the living space and contain the fire safely. The knowledge of edible plants and their preparation was another area where ingenuity flourished. Identifying which roots were safe to eat, which berries offered sustenance, and how to process potentially toxic plants to render them edible required a deep understanding of the natural world. They discovered that some roots, bitter and unpalatable in their raw state, became sweet and nourishing after being buried in the earth for a period, a natural process of fermentation and starch conversion. The gathering of these resources was a cyclical activity dictated by the seasons and involved a sophisticated knowledge of plant life cycles. Furthermore, their understanding of animal behavior extended beyond the hunt itself. They observed migration patterns, nesting habits, and the social structures of the animals they relied upon, using this knowledge to their advantage. They knew, for instance, when certain animals would be at their fattest, or when they would be more vulnerable. The creation of traps and snares, employing the same principles of leverage and tension found in their tools, allowed them to capture smaller game efficiently, conserving their energy and reducing the risk associated with larger, more dangerous hunts. In essence, the clan's ingenuity was a continuous, iterative process. It was the product of a society that lived in intimate, constant dialogue with its environment. Every observation, every success, every failure contributed to a growing body of practical knowledge that was passed down and refined. It was a testament to the human capacity for adaptation, a fierce and beautiful demonstration of how the spirit, when faced with adversity, could not only endure but also innovate, creating a sustainable existence from the very harshness that sought to extinguish it. This quiet brilliance, woven into the threads of their daily lives, was the true engine of their survival, the unyielding force that allowed them to carve a life out of the unforgiving embrace of the Ice Age. The primal dance of fire was not merely a convenience, it was a cornerstone of existence, a testament to the clan's deep understanding of the forces that governed their world. It was a skill honed not in the fleeting glow of a manufactured spark, but in the slow, deliberate friction of wood against wood, a process that demanded an almost sacred patience and profound respect for the elements. The tools of this ancient craft were as elemental as the fire itself. Two pieces of dry, dead wood, meticulously selected for their hardness and dryness. One, a sturdy piece known as the fireboard, would be notched at its edge. The other, a spindle like stick, the drill, would be twirled with astonishing speed between the palms of the hands. The friction generated by the relentless rotation, pressing the drill into the notch of the fireboard, was the key. It was a physical exertion, a rhythmic exertion that warmed the hands and tested the endurance, each rotation a whisper of anticipation. The goal was to create a fine, dark powder, the dust of fire that would accumulate in the notch. This dust, heated by the ceaseless friction, would eventually begin to smolder, a tiny, incandescent ember born from sheer persistence. The creation of this crucial ember was only the beginning of a complex, multi-stage process. The clan understood that the ember, however promising, was a fragile thing, a fleeting spark, easily extinguished by the slightest disturbance. Therefore, the preparation of tinder was paramount, an art form in itself. This was not the random collection of dry leaves. It was a deliberate, careful gathering of the most combustible materials available. The inner bark of certain trees, when scraped into fine, fluffy fibers, provided an excellent base. Dried mosses, particularly those found in sheltered, dry crevices, were prized for their ability to catch a spark. Even animal fur, carefully gathered from shed pelts or meticulously cleaned from hides, offered a surprisingly effective medium for nurturing a nascent flame. This tinder, once gathered, was kept in a meticulously dry and protected place, often within specially crafted pouches made from cured animal intestines or tightly woven plant fibers, safeguarding it from the pervasive dampness of their environment. When the moment arrived to coax a fire into life, the process was carried out with a focused reverence. The smoldering ember, carefully transferred from the fireboard onto a prepared nest of tinder, was the heart of the operation. The clan member would then cup this nest gently in their hands, protecting it from any errant drafts. Then came the crucial element, breath. It was not a harsh, forceful blast, but a steady, controlled exhalation, a series of soft puffs directed at the ember. Each breath was an act of faith, a carefully measured infusion of life giving oxygen. As the ember grew brighter, the tinder would begin to glow, a faint red bloom spreading through the fibers. The puffs of breath would become more frequent, more insistent, until, with a sudden, glorious surge, a tiny flame would erupt, a fragile banner of light and warmth. The successful birth of a fire was met not with boisterous celebration, but with a quiet, shared sense of accomplishment. This was more than just a practical achievement. It was a triumph of ingenuity and perseverance over the overwhelming forces of nature. The fire, once established, was treated with the utmost respect. It was carefully fed with progressively larger pieces of dry wood, its hungry flames growing stronger, pushing back the oppressive darkness that perpetually threatened to engulf their world. The hearth, often a carefully constructed ring of stones, served not only to contain the fire, but also to reflect its precious warmth back into the shelter, transforming a cold, unwelcoming space into a sanctuary of life. The benefits of this hard won fire were manifold, extending far beyond the simple provision of heat. It was the alchemist's tool, capable of transforming raw, often unpalatable ingredients into nourishing sustenance. Tough roots, rendered edible only through prolonged cooking, were softened and sweetened. Even the most sinewy cuts of meat, when roasted over the flames, became tender and digestible. The act of cooking not only made food more appealing, but also rendered it safer, killing unseen pathogens that could lead to debilitating illness. This culinary transformation was a crucial step in unlocking the full nutritional potential of their diet, allowing them to extract every last calorie and nutrient from the resources they painstakingly acquired. Beyond its role in sustenance, fire was also a formidable weapon. The flickering flames and the acrid smoke were powerful deterrents against the many predators that roamed the frozen wilderness. The guttural roars and piercing howl of nocturnal hunters, which could send shivers of primal fear down their spines, were often silenced by the steady presence of a well-tended fire. The mere sight of the dancing flames, coupled with the scent of burning wood, was enough to dissuade many creatures from venturing too close to their encampments. It created a perimeter of safety, a visible boundary that offered a measure of protection against the unseen dangers lurking in the surrounding darkness. The knowledge of how to maintain a fire throughout the long, cold nights was thus as critical as knowing how to start one, a continuous vigil against both the encroaching chill and the predatory inhabitants of their world. Furthermore, the fire served as the social and emotional nucleus of the clan. Gathered around its warmth, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, the bonds of community were strengthened. It was a time for sharing stories, for passing down the accumulated wisdom of generations, for reaffirming their shared identity in the face of relentless adversity. The crackling flames were a constant, comforting presence, a tangible symbol of their collective resilience. Even in the deepest, darkest hours of winter, The fire represented hope, a promise of renewal, a steadfast companion that allowed them to endure the seemingly insurmountable challenges of their environment. The mastering of this elemental force, therefore, was not just a survival skill, it was the very essence of their ability to thrive, to build community, and to preserve their unyielding spirit. It was an art form, born of necessity and perfected through generations of unwavering practice. The meticulous process of creating fire was a testament to the clan's deep understanding of cause and effect, a profound grasp of how subtle changes in material and technique could yield dramatically different results. They had learned, through countless hours of trial and error, the crucial role of moisture. Any hint of dampness in their fire making materials could spell the difference between a vibrant flame and a frustrating, smoky failure. This drove an obsessive focus on sourcing and storing dry wood. They would seek out deadfall that had been protected from rain and snow, often finding it within the dense canopies of ancient trees or in sheltered rock formations. Wood that had been struck by lightning, though perhaps a frightening omen, was often exceptionally dry and thus highly prized for its fire-starting potential. The preparation of the fireboard and drill involved not just selection, but also a careful shaping and smoothing, ensuring a consistent and efficient transfer of kinetic energy. The preparation of the tinder bundle itself was an intricate ritual. It wasn't merely about gathering combustible material. It was about arranging it in a way that would maximize its receptivity to the nascent ember and its ability to sustain the initial flame. The finest, fluffiest fibers were placed at the very center, forming a soft cradle for the ember. Around this core, slightly coarser, longer fibers were layered, acting as conduits for the initial flicker of flame, gradually drawing it outwards. The entire bundle was then gently shaped into a loose, airy nest, allowing for optimal airflow without being so diffuse that the ember would simply fall through. This careful arrangement was critical, for a poorly constructed tinder bundle could smother the precious ember before it had a chance to ignite, turning hours of labor into a disheartening failure. The technique of spinning the drill was equally nuanced. It wasn't simply about speed, it was about applying consistent downward pressure while simultaneously rotating the spindle. This required a coordination of movement and a subtle control that could only be developed through relentless practice. Some individuals, particularly those with long, strong fingers, developed a remarkable dexterity, able to maintain a high-speed rotation for extended periods, generating the necessary friction with impressive efficiency. Others, perhaps lacking this natural advantage, would employ a slightly different technique, perhaps utilizing a bow drill method if they had discovered a suitable natural material for a bowstring, such as a strong vine or a flexible strip of hide. This adaptability, the ability to innovate and modify techniques based on available resources and individual capabilities, was a hallmark of their survivalist mindset. Once the ember was successfully transferred to the tinder bundle, the breath technique became paramount. It was a delicate ballet of oxygen delivery. Too much too soon, and the ember would be blown out. Too little, and it would simply die. The clan members learned to feel the subtle changes in the tinder, to sense when the ember was growing stronger, when it was ready for a more robust supply of air. The initial puffs were gentle, almost tentative, designed to coax the ember to life. As the glow intensified, the puffs would become more rapid and forceful, each breath a deliberate infusion of vitality. The moment the tinder burst into flame was a shared exhalation of relief and triumph, a silent acknowledgement of a collective effort, even if only one individual had performed the physical act. The subsequent nurturing of the fire was equally important. The newly ignited flame, though a joyous sight, was still vulnerable. It required careful feeding, starting with the smallest, driest twigs, progressively adding larger pieces of fuel as the fire gained strength. This was a process of building the fire's momentum, of gradually increasing its capacity to consume and radiate heat. The clan had developed an intuitive understanding of fuel types, knowing which woods burned hottest and longest, which produced the most desirable coals, and which were best reserved for specific purposes. Hardwoods like oak and birch were favored for their long, steady burn, providing consistent warmth throughout the night. Softer woods, while burning faster, were useful for quickly bringing a fire to life or for generating intense heat for specific cooking tasks. The maintenance of the fire was a continuous responsibility. During the day, it was managed as needed for cooking, crafting, or simply for light. But at night, it became a constant vigil. Designated individuals would take turns tending the flames, ensuring that it never died out. This often involved rising in the deepest hours of the night, adding fresh fuel, and rekindling any embers that threatened to fade. The knowledge of how to bank a fire, to cover the embers with ash to conserve heat and allow for easier relighting in the morning, was a vital technique that saved precious time and effort. The fire also played a crucial role in their spiritual and ceremonial life. While the previous context hinted at practical ingenuity, the fire was also a conduit to something more profound. The stories told around its warmth were not just accounts of hunts or daily tasks. They were woven with myths, legends, and the teachings of their ancestors. The dancing flames could be seen as embodying spirits, the smoke carrying prayers and aspirations to the heavens. The fire was a gathering place, a focal point that brought the clan together, reinforcing their shared history, their collective identity, and their hopes for the future. It was a constant reminder that even in the most desolate and unforgiving of environments, life, warmth, and community could be nurtured and sustained. The mastery of fire was, therefore, not just a technological achievement. It was a fundamental aspect of their cultural and spiritual survival, an enduring symbol of their unyielding spirit in the face of the primordial cold. The clan's existence was a delicate negotiation with the colossal, unforgiving world of ice. These frozen expanses, stretching as far as the eye could see, were not simply inert barriers to be endured, but dynamic, living entities that dictated the very rhythm of their lives. Their understanding of these glacial arteries ran deeper than mere observation. It was an inherited wisdom, a visceral comprehension of the subtle shifts in color, sound, and texture that betrayed the hidden truths beneath the shimmering surface. They knew, with an instinct honed by generations of close contact, the difference between ice that would bear their weight and ice that would betray them with a sudden, fatal embrace. This profound connection to the frozen world was most evident in their methods of travel. The vast frozen rivers were not obstacles to be skirted, but highways that connected disparate territories and provided access to essential resources. They navigated these icy currents with a practiced grace, their footfalls light and sure, their bodies attuned to the slightest creak or groan from the ice beneath. They learned to read the patterns of snow accumulation, recognizing that thicker drifts often masked thinner ice, while wind scoured patches could indicate a more robust, stable surface. When traversing larger frozen lakes or plains, they would often send scouts ahead, testing the ice with long, sturdy poles, listening for the telltale signs of instability. A sharp, cracking sound, like a whip cracking in the distance, was a universal warning, a signal to halt and reevaluate their path. Conversely, a deep, resonant hum, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the ice, was a sign of its strength and integrity, a promise of safe passage. Their hunts were inextricably linked to the frozen terrain. The migrating herds of reindeer, mammoths, and other creatures upon which they depended were themselves creatures of the Ice Age, their movements dictated by the availability of grazing and the harsh dictates of the seasons. The clan became expert trackers, their eyes trained to discern the faintest sign of passage, a disturbed patch of snow, a broken twig at the edge of a frozen riverbank, the telltale imprint of a hoof, or a massive foot in the hardened earth beneath a shallow thaw. They learned to anticipate the routes these herds would take, understanding that frozen rivers often served as natural corridors, guiding the animals across the vast plains. A herd of mammoths, their shaggy coats glistening with frost, moving across a frozen tundra, presented a formidable but vital opportunity. The success of a hunt often depended on their ability to utilize the ice to their advantage. They learned to drive prey towards treacherous ice formations or to the edges of frozen bodies of water where the ice might be thinner or already broken. A stampede of reindeer thundering across a frozen lake could be guided by strategically placed markers or by the hunters themselves, creating noise and movement to steer the herd in a desired direction. If a creature was brought down near the water's edge, the frozen surface provided a stable platform for butchering, allowing them to process the massive carcass without the complications of mud or uneven ground. The sheer cold itself was a preservation tool, allowing them to store meat for extended periods, a vital strategy in a world where food security was a constant concern. Beyond the practicalities of travel and hunting, the ice held a deeper, more nuanced significance. It was a source of water, albeit one that required significant effort to access. The clan knew where to find areas where the ice was naturally cleaner and less likely to be contaminated by permafrost or buried organic matter. They would break off chunks of clear ice, often carrying them back to camp in specially designed sleds pulled by strong members of the clan or by their trained dogs. This ice would then be melted slowly over the fire, providing precious, pure water for drinking and cooking. In times of extreme scarcity, they would even learn to identify areas where naturally occurring meltwater pools might form, even in the coldest months, often near geothermally active areas or at the confluence of underground springs that resisted the deep freeze. The ice was also a canvas upon which the very history of their world was etched. They learned to read the layers of compacted snow and ice, understanding that each layer represented a season, a period of snowfall, and the passage of time. While they did not possess written records, their elders could often discern patterns in the ice, indicating periods of extreme cold, heavy snowfall, or prolonged thaws. This knowledge, passed down through oral traditions and interpreted through the lens of their own experiences, contributed to their understanding of cyclical patterns in their environment, helping them to anticipate future challenges and opportunities. The way the wind sculpted the snow into intricate patterns, the deep blue hues of ancient glacial ice, the ephemeral beauty of frost flowers forming on the surface, these were all elements of a language they understood. The clan's survival was, therefore, a testament to their intimate, almost symbiotic relationship with the ice. They didn't just endure the frozen landscapes, they navigated them, exploited them, and respected them. Their movements were dictated by its presence, their sustenance often derived from its frozen embrace, and their very understanding of the world shaped by its immense, unyielding power. This was not a passive existence, but an active engagement, a constant dance with the frozen heart of their world, a dance that required vigilance, knowledge, and an unyielding spirit. The clan's mastery of the frozen rivers was a critical component of their ability to expand their territory and maintain connections with other, more distant groups. These icy arteries served as natural highways, allowing them to traverse vast distances that would be virtually impassable overland due to rugged terrain or dense, impassable forests. They understood that the ice, when solid, offered a smoother, faster means of travel than navigating the treacherous, uneven ground laced with hidden obstacles. The construction and use of sleds, pulled by either their sturdy, domesticated dogs or by teams of clan members, were essential to this movement. These sleds, crafted from bone, wood, and sinew, were designed to glide efficiently over the packed snow and ice, carrying their belongings, their gathered resources, and their young. The ability to reliably cross frozen bodies of water was not a skill that came without cost. The clan had developed an intricate system of understanding the nuances of ice formation and stability. They knew that the speed at which water froze was influenced by factors such as the depth of the water, the presence of currents, and the ambient temperature. Clear black ice, formed from slow moving, undisturbed water, was generally the strongest. Conversely, milky white ice, often formed when freezing occurred rapidly or when the water was agitated, was usually weaker and more prone to breaking. They also understood the impact of snow cover. While snow could insulate the ice and slow its thickening, it also obscured the surface, making it harder to judge the ice's integrity. Therefore, wind-scoured areas, where snow had been blown away, often revealed the most reliable ice, but these areas could also be more exposed to extreme cold. During their extensive journeys, especially those undertaken during the harsh winter months, the clan would often establish temporary camps along the frozen rivers. These encampments were strategically chosen for their access to resources, perhaps a grove of trees that provided dry fuel or an area known to be frequented by game. The primary concern, however, remained the safety of their crossing points. They would often scout the riverbanks for days, testing different sections, looking for areas where the ice was thickest and most consistent. They developed a keen sense for the subtle signs of danger, a shimmering patch that suggested a layer of slush beneath the surface, a series of interconnected cracks that indicated a weakness in the ice's structure or a sudden change in the sound of their footsteps from a crisp crunch to a duller, more hollow thud. The practice of hunting along these frozen waterways was also a specialized skill. The clan knew that many aquatic animals, such as seals and large fish, would often congregate near breathing holes in the ice. Their hunters would patiently wait for hours, their bodies camouflaged against the stark white landscape, their senses honed to detect the slightest disturbance on the ice surface. When an opportunity arose, they would strike with astonishing speed and precision, often using spears tipped with sharpened bone or flint. The act of dispatching a large seal on the ice required immense strength and coordination, with multiple hunters working in unison to secure the prize and prevent it from escaping back into the frigid water. The clan's knowledge of the ice extended to its role in shaping the very landscape. They understood how glaciers, though perhaps distant and not directly encountered by every member, had carved the valleys and smoothed the mountains over millennia. They could see the evidence of past glacial activity in the rounded peaks, the U-shaped valleys, and the scattered erratic boulders that lay far from any apparent source. This deep geological understanding, though not expressed in scientific terms, informed their awareness of the land's history and its enduring power. The social implications of these ice journeys were also significant. Crossing major rivers or frozen lakes often represented expeditions into new territories, facilitating trade, the exchange of knowledge, and the strengthening of alliances with other clans. These journeys were not undertaken lightly and involved careful planning, the allocation of resources, and a shared understanding of the risks involved. The success of such expeditions depended not only on individual skill, but on the collective resilience and cooperation of the entire group. The shared experience of navigating these formidable frozen expanses forged strong bonds of camaraderie and mutual reliance, reinforcing the cohesive fabric of the clan. Furthermore, the clan had developed an understanding of the seasonal variations in the ice. They knew that the ice was generally strongest in the depths of winter when temperatures were at their lowest, and that it would begin to weaken and break up with the approach of spring. This knowledge dictated the timing of their movements and their hunting strategies. They would often delay major migrations or expeditions until the ice had fully formed and stabilized, and they would prepare to retreat from exposed areas before the thaw could make passage perilous. The timing of their lives was intrinsically linked to the cycle of freezing and thawing, a constant ebb and flow dictated by the powerful forces of nature. The ability to predict these shifts, to read the subtle signs of approaching change in the ice itself, was a crucial element of their long-term survival. The very act of living on and around the ice required a constant awareness of the potential dangers. They had learned to recognize the different types of ice formations and their associated risks. Pressure ridges, where sheets of ice had been pushed together and buckled, could create formidable obstacles, but also offered opportunities for shelter or provided access to different depths of water. Open leads, where the ice had broken apart to reveal open water, could be a source of fresh water and a place where marine mammals might be found, but also represented significant barriers to travel. The clan developed specific techniques for navigating these varied conditions, using their sleds to traverse stable ice, their spears and ropes to cross smaller leads, and in some cases, employing rudimentary raft like structures made from animal hides stretched over frames to cross larger expanses of open water if absolutely necessary, though this was a last resort. The clan's relationship with the ice was not one of conquest or domination, but of profound respect and an acute understanding of its limitations and possibilities. They moved with the rhythm of the frozen world, their lives a testament to their ability to adapt, to learn, and to persevere in one of the planet's most challenging environments. The ice was both their greatest adversary and their most essential ally, a constant reminder of the raw power of nature and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Their survival depended on their ability to read the frozen world like an open book, understanding its every word, its every nuance, and its every hidden danger. This intimate knowledge was the bedrock of their existence, the key that unlocked the secrets of the glacial age. The burden of memory was not a physical weight, though many an elder's stooped shoulders seemed to suggest as much. It was an intangible, yet formidable inheritance, passed from one generation to the next, a tapestry woven from the threads of experience, necessity, and a profound understanding of their unforgiving world. Each individual was a living repository, a walking archive of survival techniques honed over countless harsh winters. From the youngest child learning to identify the faint tracks of a snow hare to the oldest hunter who could recall the migratory patterns of mammoths from decades past, the clan's collective knowledge was its most valuable asset. This was a world where mistakes were rarely afforded a second chance, and where ignorance could lead to swift and brutal extinction. The elders, their faces maps of time, etched with the sun's glare on snow and the biting winds of 1,000 dawns, were the keepers of this vital legacy. Their eyes, though perhaps dimmed by age, still held a sharpness that could pierce the veil of a blizzard, discerning the subtle shifts in the wind's direction that foretold an impending storm. They were the living libraries of edible plants, knowing which roots could sustain them through lean times, and which berries, though tempting in their vibrant hues, held the bitter kiss of poison. They taught the young to read the language of the land, to interpret the rustle of leaves that might signal the approach of a dire wolf, or the peculiar stillness that often preceded the terrifying charge of a wounded mammoth. This oral tradition, the bedrock of their existence, was far more potent than any carved bone or sharpened flint. It was the very essence of their continuity, the unseen force that allowed their lineage to persist against the relentless backdrop of a world that offered no concessions, no margin for error. Consider the knowledge of the ice itself, a subject that required an entire lifetime to truly master. The elders spoke of the subtle differences in the sound of a footfall, the crisp, sharp crackle on solid, ancient ice versus the hollow, ominous thud on thinner, more perilous layers. They taught the importance of observing the way snow accumulated, noting how deep drifts often masked weaker ice formations, while wind-scoured patches, though treacherous to the uninitiated, could indicate a more stable, predictable surface. The lessons were delivered not through abstract instruction, but through direct experience, with the elders guiding the younger ones, their hands steadying them as they tested the ice with a long, sturdy pole, their voices a low, constant stream of observation and warning. They learned to read the color of the ice, discerning the clear, almost black hues that signified deep, undisturbed freezing from the opaque, milky white that spoke of rapid, turbulent formation, a sign of inherent weakness. The transmission of knowledge was not a passive affair. It was an active, immersive process. During the long winter nights, huddled around the flickering flames of a communal fire, the elders would recount tales of past hunts, of perilous journeys, and of the ingenuity that had seen their ancestors through times of extreme hardship. These were not mere stories, they were practical lessons disguised as narrative. A tale of a successful mammoth hunt might detail the specific techniques used to corner the beast, the precise angles at which spears were thrown, and the methods employed to utilize the terrain to their advantage, perhaps driving the colossal creature towards a treacherous ice formation or a steep ravine. Each anecdote was a masterclass in strategy, in understanding animal behavior, and in the unyielding application of force. The clan's understanding of the local flora was equally intricate. They knew which fungi grew on decaying wood after a thaw, providing a much needed boost of nutrients, and which roots, when dried and ground, could be used to thicken stews, adding substance and warmth. They understood the seasonal cycles of plant life, knowing when certain berries were at their peak ripeness, when medicinal herbs were most potent, and when the hardy, leathery leaves of specific bushes could be harvested to supplement their diet or to be used in crafting. This encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world was crucial. A misidentification of a plant could lead to illness or even death, a risk they could ill afford in their precarious existence. The elders would often lead foraging expeditions, their keen eyes scanning the ground, their fingers gently probing the soil, demonstrating the proper way to unearth roots without damaging them, or to pluck berries without crushing them. Furthermore, the elders served as the keepers of the clan's history, their memories a living chronicle of migrations, of alliances formed and broken, of triumphs and tragedies. They could recall the times when their people had faced devastating famines, when entire families had been lost to the elements, and when the courage and resourcefulness of a few had been enough to ensure the survival of the many. These stories served a dual purpose. They honored the memory of those who had come before, and they provided invaluable context for the challenges the current generation might face. Knowing that their ancestors had overcome similar adversities instilled a sense of resilience and determination, a belief that they too could endure. The act of teaching was a sacred trust. There was no formal schooling, no written language to consult. The lessons were etched onto the minds of the young through repetition, through demonstration, and through the weight of consequence. A boy who failed to properly secure a snare might find himself returning to an empty trap, a silent but effective lesson in diligence and precision. A girl who carelessly handled a sharp flint might learn the sting of a deep cut, a sharp reminder of the respect due to dangerous tools. The elders, while patient, were also firm. They understood that the stakes were too high for leniency when it came to crucial survival skills. The elder shamans, or those with a particular affinity for the spiritual aspects of their world, also held a unique form of knowledge. They understood the intricate web of relationships between the clan, the animals they hunted, the spirits of the land, and the celestial bodies above. They knew the rituals that honored the animal spirits after a kill, ensuring that the life force of the creature would be respected and that its spirit would not be angered. They understood the significance of certain star patterns, which could guide them during night travel or predicted changes in weather. Their wisdom was not always grounded in the tangible, but it was no less vital to the clan's overall well being. They offered comfort in times of loss, guidance in times of uncertainty, and a connection to a world beyond the immediate physical challenges. The process of knowledge transfer was a continuous one, weaving itself into the fabric of daily life. It was present in the shared labor of preparing hides for clothing, in the meticulous chipping of stone to create arrowheads, and in the careful tending of the communal fire that provided warmth and light. Every task, no matter how mundane, was an opportunity for learning. The elders observed, they corrected, and they imparted the wisdom that had been passed down to them. They understood that the survival of the clan was not the responsibility of a single individual, but a collective endeavor, with each member playing a vital role, armed with the knowledge that allowed them to fulfill that role effectively. This vast reservoir of accumulated knowledge was the true strength of the clan. It allowed them to thrive, not merely survive, in a world that was designed to break them. It was the silent, unseen partner in every successful hunt, every safe passage across treacherous ice, and every moment of respite from the biting cold. The burden of memory was heavy, yes, but it was also the very foundation upon which their unyielding spirit was built. It was the promise that no matter how fierce the storm or how deep the hunger, the wisdom of generations would guide them through. The lessons learned, the experiences recorded, the wisdom imparted. These were the true treasures of the clan, more precious than any material wealth, for they ensured the continuation of their existence, a flicker of human resilience against the vast, indifferent canvas of the glacial age. The elders, in their wisdom, understood that this knowledge was not static. It was a living, breathing entity, constantly being tested, refined, and expanded by the ongoing experiences of the clan. Each new generation added its own unique contributions, its own discoveries, its own hard won insights, ensuring that the tapestry of knowledge grew richer and more resilient with the passing of time. This was the true legacy, the enduring strength that would allow them to face whatever the unyielding world might throw at them. The first blush of dawn, a tentative smear of pale rose against the bruised indigo of the night sky, was a signal, not a fanfare of trumpets, nor a call to arms, but a quiet, deeply ingrained recognition that the longest, most dangerous stretch of time had passed. Each dawn was a testament, a silent proclamation whispered on the wind. We endured in an age where the very act of breathing could be a gamble, where a single misstep into the unforgiving snow could lead to a swift, icy embrace. The simple arrival of light was not taken for granted. It was a victory, hard won and deeply felt, a continuation of the precarious dance with existence. The night, cloaked in its deepest shadows, was a time of heightened vulnerability. The cold, a tangible enemy, seeped through furs and sinew, chilling bone and clouding thought. Every rustle in the frozen landscape, every distant howl, carried the weight of potential threat. Predators, masters of the dark, moved with a stealth born of eons of adaptation. their senses honed to the slightest disturbance. For the clan, huddled around the dying embers of their fire, the hours before sunrise were a vigil. Sleep, when it came, was a shallow, restless thing, punctuated by the need to rekindle the flames, to listen for the telltale snap of a twig underfoot, to reassure themselves of their collective presence. The darkness was a test of nerve, a brutal examination of their will to remain alive. And then the light. It began as a faint luminescence on the eastern horizon, a promise that the oppressive dominion of night was waning. It was a subtle shift at first, a lessening of the absolute blackness, but it carried immense significance. The elders, their faces lined like ancient riverbeds, would be the first to stir, their internal clocks attuned to the rhythms of the natural world. Their eyes, accustomed to the dim glow of firelight and the stark contrasts of the icy plains, would seek out that nascent glow. It was a silent communion, a shared understanding that the night's trials had been weathered. There was no cheering, no exultation. Such displays were wasteful of energy, and energy was a precious commodity. Instead, there was a quiet settling, a release of the taut muscles that had remained clenched through the hours of darkness. The dawning light brought with it a cascade of practical necessities, all underscored by the fundamental victory of having survived the night. The first task was always to assess the immediate surroundings. Had any predators drawn too close? Were there any new threats that the darkness had concealed? A few individuals, chosen for their vigilance and knowledge of the terrain, would venture out from the warmth of the shelter, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They moved with a practiced caution, their eyes scanning the snow for tracks, their ears straining to catch any unusual sound. The returning reports, delivered in low, guttural tones, would confirm the nature of their continued existence, whether the night had passed in relative peace or if new dangers lurked just beyond the firelight. The sunrise also marked the beginning of the day's relentless demands. The search for sustenance, a constant imperative, would commence. The skills honed over generations were brought to bear. The hunter, his body lean and hardened by constant movement, would study the subtle signs in the snow, a disturbed patch of ice, a faint imprint of a hoof, the way the wind had sculpted a drift. He knew that the animals, too, were preparing for the day, emerging from their own nocturnal struggles. The frozen landscape, so seemingly inert, was in fact alive with the quiet skirmishes of survival. The sunrise was not an end to the struggle, but a shift in its nature. The challenges of the night were replaced by the challenges of the day, a different set of predators, a different set of environmental hazards, but the underlying goal remained the same: to live, to see another dawn. The early morning air, though still bitingly cold, carried a different quality with the rising sun. There was a subtle crispness to it, a promise of a day that could be shaped, however minimally, by their own actions. The clan's movements became more purposeful. Those tasked with gathering fuel would fan out, their eyes trained on the frozen bushes and low-lying branches that might still hold a spark of life. The women, their hands roughened by constant work, would begin the arduous process of preparing the day's meager meal, utilizing the resources secured from previous hunts. Every action was deliberate, every movement honed for efficiency. There was no room for wasted effort, for dithering. The sunrise was a call to action, a stark reminder that the hours of daylight were finite. This daily cycle of survival, beginning with the profound victory of the sunrise, was the unalterable rhythm of their lives. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a primal instinct that refused to be extinguished by the overwhelming odds. They did not possess the luxury of hope in the way that later generations might understand it. Theirs was a hope rooted in action, in the tangible evidence of their own survival. Each sunrise was a confirmation that their skills, their knowledge, and their collective will were sufficient, at least for another day, to push back against the encroaching darkness and the gnawing hunger. It was a quiet, uncelebrated triumph, repeated day after day, season after season, a testament to the enduring power of life itself. The light was not a gift, it was a consequence of their persistence. The elder shamans, observing the subtle changes in the light, would often perform their own quiet rituals. These were not elaborate ceremonies, but simple gestures of respect for the life giving force of the sun. A handful of dried herbs tossed into the rekindled fire, a murmured chant directed towards the growing light, a moment of silent contemplation. They understood that the sun represented not just the absence of darkness, but a fundamental source of energy and renewal, however faint it might appear in their world. It was a connection to a power greater than themselves, a power that sustained the very cycle of life that they were so desperately clinging to. Their reverence for the sunrise was a recognition of the forces that governed their existence, a way of acknowledging their place within the grand, indifferent sweep of natural law. The transmission of this understanding of the sunrise as a victory began at a very young age. Children, as soon as they were able to comprehend the world around them, were taught to recognize the subtle signs of dawn. They learned to associate the faint lightening of the sky with the end of the night's dangers and the beginning of the day's work. They saw the quiet nod of approval from their elders, the subtle release of tension in the communal shelter, and they understood. The sunrise was not merely a celestial event, it was a personal triumph. They learned that the night was a test, and the dawn was the proof of their passing. This ingrained understanding fostered a deep seated resilience, a knowledge that even in the face of overwhelming hardship, there was always the possibility of enduring. Even the youngest of children, their minds still a blur of new sensations, would often wake with the first hint of light. They might not fully grasp the intricate web of survival that their elders navigated, but they understood the shift. The oppressive stillness of the night would give way to the stirrings of activity, the faint sounds of their clanmates beginning their day. They would look towards the openings of their shelter, their eyes drawn to the increasing illumination, and a sense of relief, however nascent, would wash over them. It was an innate recognition of safety, a primal understanding that the dangers of the dark were receding. This early conditioning, this constant reinforcement of the sunrise as a positive event, laid the groundwork for the unyielding spirit that defined their people. The quality of the light itself was also a subject of subtle observation. The elders, with their intimate knowledge of the seasons and the climate, could discern the time of year by the specific hue of the dawn. The pale, washed out light of the deep winter, struggling to penetrate the thick clouds, was different from the sharper, more intense light of the approaching spring, even if spring was still many weeks away. They could read the story of the day before it had truly begun, predicting the likely intensity of the cold, the potential for snow, or the rare possibility of a brief period of relative warmth. This observational skill, honed by necessity, was another layer in their understanding of the sunrise as a marker of time and a harbinger of what was to come. The preparation of the hunting tools, the sharpening of spearheads, the careful checking of bowstrings. These were all activities that commenced with the arrival of the light. The sunrise signaled the time for proactive engagement with their environment rather than passive endurance. The hunters would emerge, their movements economical and precise, their focus absolute. They understood that the prey was often most active during the transitional periods of dawn and dusk, when the light was low and provided some cover for their own movements. The sunrise, therefore, was not just a signal of survival, but a tactical opportunity. It was the beginning of the hunt, the moment when their skills and their knowledge could be most effectively applied to secure the resources needed to continue their existence. The social cohesion of the clan was also reinforced by this daily ritual. As the members emerged from their temporary shelters, their faces still bearing the marks of the night's sleep, there was a quiet acknowledgement of shared experience. The shared struggle of the night, the collective vigilance, created a bond that transcended individual differences. The sunrise, in this context, was a moment of reunion, a reaffirmation of their collective strength. The elders would observe their clan members, noting their condition, their readiness for the day, and offering quiet words of encouragement or guidance. This daily communion, beginning with the simple act of greeting the dawn, was essential to maintaining the group's morale and its ability to function as a cohesive unit. The concept of victory in their world was not one of conquest or dominion. It was a victory over entropy, over the forces that sought to pull them apart and extinguish their existence. The sunrise was a victory over the darkness, over the cold, over the predators, and over that ever-present specter of death. It was a victory achieved not through aggressive action, but through a profound capacity for endurance, through the meticulous application of learned knowledge, and through an unwavering commitment to their collective survival. This unyielding spirit, forged in the crucible of an unforgiving environment, was their most prized possession, and the sunrise was its daily, silent affirmation. The continued existence of the clan was a testament to this cyclical victory. Each successful sunrise was a building block, a small but significant contribution to the ongoing narrative of their survival. The memory of past generations who had faced similar challenges and passed on the wisdom that now guided them was woven into this daily reaffirmation. They were not merely surviving for themselves, but for those who had come before and for those who would follow. The sunrise, therefore, was more than just a personal triumph. It was a link in an unbroken chain, a continuation of a legacy that stretched back into the mists of time. It was a profound and deeply felt victory, celebrated not with fanfare, but with the quiet determination to face the day and to live to see another dawn.